I am a creature of habit. Every morning, I got up at 6 a.m., got ready for the day, and went to a cute little coffee house up the street from my apartment. I typically got the same thing. If it was cold, it was a chai latte or cappuccino. If it was hot, then it was an iced white mocha. I rarely did anything different, but the baristas knew me, and I suppose I was an easy and low-maintenance customer. I would leave there around 8:30 and then head to work, which always made my day start out great. I could enjoy my caffeine and do whatever I wanted uninterrupted. Until I had to go to work, that is. Depending on the day, I might read, or work on something for work, or even just browse my computer for whatever caught my eye that morning. It really was just my moment of peace before the day got started. However, I never knew having such a pattern could also cause problems. This happened a few years ago, in September. I live in the Northeast, and we were starting to get the cool autumn weather. I wasn't quite ready to switch over to a hot drink yet, so I was still enjoying my iced lattes at the time. One day, as I was waiting in line to order, there was another woman in front of me placing her order. She looked to be about my age. She had short, ashy brown hair. She was wearing what I would describe as someone starting in corporate or going to an interview. She had on slacks with a matching jacket and a light blue colored blouse underneath it. The jacket looked like it was probably 2 sizes too big for her, though. I only saw her from the back at first, but she mentioned how she had never been here before and didn't know what to get. I thought I would be nice and told her if she was looking for something different, then she should try their signature Cloud 9 latte, which tasted like toasted marshmallow. It was nice on those days when I wanted to branch out. When I suggested this, she turned to me and her face lit up. She thanked me and placed her order for a Cloud 9, and then I placed my order. I spoke with the barista, I'll call her Amy, before I went to my spot per my normal routine. Once I sat down, the suit lady walked over to me and thanked me for the suggestion. She said she was new in the city and that she had just moved here with her boyfriend due to a job offer that she got. I congratulated her, and she asked me for some of the best places to go for groceries, restaurants, and places to avoid. It was something that I definitely wasn't expecting, but I gave her my best answers and she thanked me before leaving. Then I watched her put her coffee in a cup holder, and put on a helmet, and drive away on a scooter. I just remember thinking that she seemed like a really eccentric person. Wearing a business suit and driving a scooter really seemed to tickle me. As the week went on, I would visit the coffee house, and the suit lady would come in shortly after me. Typically, I was already sitting down by the time she got there, so I would smile or nod at her. She would order, and then she'd sit at the table across from me every time. Her choice of seats didn't seem odd either. Maybe she saw me as a familiar face and wanted to sit close. Not to mention, I was always in the same seat, so others doing the same really wasn't weird to me either. But it started escalating from here, which is when I felt things were off. Suit lady didn't have a purse, but just a fairly large backpack. Once she sat down, she would pull out a laptop, a notepad, and a pen. I would glance up to see the reflection of the laptop screen on her glasses as she scrolled through pages. She would write things down and sip her coffee. Pretty normal-looking stuff at first. But one day, I started getting the feeling that I was being watched. Now, of course, I had obviously glanced at her a few times, doing the normal people-watching that I and many other people do. I may look up and see her writing away, or others who scrape the chair across the floor, just things like that. But this feeling I was getting was like someone's intent was to watch me. I looked up from my book and looked around the room while I stretched, trying to make it look normal. That's when I noticed Suit Lady, let's call her Susie, staring at me, with her hand on her chin holding it up. It was like she was daydreaming or spacing out, but staring right at me. It was kind of weird. When we locked eyes, I smiled and nodded, but she didn't break. So I just looked back down at my book to ignore it. But every so often I would look up and she would still be staring at me. Strange, but it didn't feel too weird. Once 8:30 hit, I started packing up, and as I was walking by Susie, she flipped her notepad over and was closing her laptop. With her apparel, which was another suit-like outfit, maybe she was working on something confidential at work and took it seriously. As serious as you could working on it in a public place, I guess. But it only seemed to get weirder. She started coming in at the same time as me, and was ordering right after me. However, she always ordered the same thing as me. At first, I thought she was just trying something different, but it was every time. Here's the thing. I switched to my hot drink, a chai latte, and so did she. However, I don't think she liked chai because I watched her take a drink and her face soured. She didn't take another drink while we were there, but she did continue watching me. But day after day, I would order my chai and so would she. She never drank it. Why continue to get something if you didn't like it? So now she was copying my drink and still continued to stare at me. Sometimes she would look at me and then back down at her pad and continue writing furiously. You would think there was a board behind me or something that she was writing down, but there was nothing there. I thought her ordering my drink and staring at me was strange enough, but she kept surprising me. She came in wearing what I can only assume to be a wig. I have long dark auburn hair, and she came in one day with long auburn hair. You can't exactly grow your hair from shoulder to mid-back overnight, so it had to be a wig. But her wearing a wig isn't the problem. It was the fact that it looked just like my hair. I know what you're thinking, though. Maybe she liked the color or style. That's harmless, right? Sure. But how would you feel if that same person, the one staring at you, ordering your drink, matching your hair color and style, then walked into the coffee house wearing almost the exact same outfit you wore the previous day? I would say that my style is more grunge or cottagecore, depending on the day. Definitely not the corporate suit style, the style that she always wore. This day, she walked in wearing an olive green overall dress, a lacy cream-colored long-sleeve shirt underneath, tights, and brown boots. I got the dress from a local store and it had a mushroom pattern on it, so I knew it was the same one. The blouse and boots looked almost identical, and the tights were plain black. The ones I had wore had a bug pattern on them. That was the only difference. This was completely different from what she normally would wear. And I knew it wasn't just me because when I placed my order, Amy had that look on her face, with a raised eyebrow, telling me she noticed it too. It was definitely weird, but not creepy or alarming, I guess. But it only got worse. She tried to copy my every move. She would call the baristas by name like I did. She would walk over and add extra cinnamon to her drink that she still wouldn't drink. She would order a pastry when I did and take a bit of it at the exact same time. Why was this happening? Why me? She even showed up at the same time as me. Or at least was in the parking lot when I was pulling in. And she left at the same time. She never followed me after leaving, but I was constantly paranoid that she would. I don't know why she would, but it was still something I feared. At least, that was until one day, something happened with my alarm and it didn't go off. So, I ended up getting out later than I expected. That always threw my whole day off, so When I got to the coffee house, I saw Susie standing outside by her scooter with her helmet still on. She noticed me walking to the door, and I saw her rip her helmet off and rush to the door, commenting how she had just got there too. Like it was a coincidence. She had obviously been there for a moment because I could see her in the parking lot from the intersection. Why lie about it? I got my coffee and sat down and decided to take the time to finish a puzzle game on my phone, to try and mellow out since I was already annoyed. But again, I saw her staring at me. This time I could tell by the reflection of her glasses, which are now large round glasses like mine, that her laptop wasn't even on. It was a black screen, but she was acting like she was doing something on it. But sure enough, she was also staring at me. I was not in the mood, and it was weirding me out how much she tried to and succeeded at looking like me, so I decided to call it quits and head out to work early. Again, Susie was always there until 8:30, so her leaving at the same time as me made no sense. As I walked out, she made a comment like, "Early workday, huh?" And I stopped and just stared at her. And finally it came out. I told her how uncomfortable she had made me by staring at me, and asked why she was dressing like me. I'll never forget the crazy look in her eyes and the creepy smile she gave me. She took what I said as a compliment. She thanked me for noticing, and talked about how perfect I was. She said the way that I dressed and how I carried myself, it looked like everyone respected me. The only people she saw me interact with were the baristas, and that's not because they saw me as someone with power, but because it was mutual respect. We got to know each other. Hell, I'd even house sat for the owners before. But that was the thing. She took all this as me being someone special, and she wanted to be me. Those were her words. She said she could start a fresh new life here being me, and no one would know the difference. Then, she asked me if I wanted to swap lives. I told her to leave me alone and stop following me, and walked off. I drove to work, taking a different route, hoping she wouldn't follow me. Had she followed me to work before, I had no idea, but I didn't want to take any chances. Unfortunately, she bothered me enough that I stopped going to the coffee shop for a couple of weeks. I got a text from the owner one day asking if I was okay, which made me go back. Amy and the owner were working that morning, and as soon as she saw me, Amy's eyes got big and she asked if I was okay. I explained to her about how Susie had freaked me out enough to not come back for a while, and she explained what happened afterwards. She said that Susie continued to show up, but she never came in. She would pace the parking lot looking around, and then would leave at 8:30 a.m. She would stand out there for almost 2 hours, as if she was waiting for me to show up. But just a few days prior to me coming in, the woman had a meltdown outside, scaring some customers, and the owner had to tell her to leave, as now she was just loitering and possibly becoming a problem. Since then, she hadn't come back. It was disturbing to hear that she seemed to wait for me, but was relieved that she was finally gone. Every time the door opened for about a week or so, I shuddered, fearing that I would see her walk in, but she really never did come back. So, what was the point in all of that? To completely change your wardrobe to match someone wouldn't exactly be cheap. And what the hell did she mean by me being perfect and starting a new life? What was wrong with hers? I don't know. Even if she was harmless, or mostly harmless, part of me thinks there was something more to her. Maybe she just needed help, but with how quickly she clung to me and fell apart when there was a change, it was just unsettling to me. I just hope that she found something about her own life and clung to it, rather than copying someone else's. I was 14 when I learned that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they're so good at pretending to be normal that only children and animals seem to be able to see right through them. This happened to myself, my mother, and my sister, but I'm going to be vague with the location and names because it was a pretty serious situation, and I don't want people to potentially try and look me up. However, I do like sharing it, even though like is an odd word to use here, because it's a great reminder for others to truly trust your instincts, or the instincts of others for that matter. Back in the early 2000s, I think it was 2004, my mother planned a vacation for the three of us. My parents separated a few years prior, and because he was kind of a deadbeat, we moved in with our mom. We were living at my grandparents' house for about a year, and then my grandparents helped my mom get a small house for us. I know things were a little tight at first, but it wasn't too bad. My dad never had a stable job. He would get fired or just quit saying he wasn't happy with it, but was never in a rush to find a new job. I may have been young, but I could tell that it was a struggle for my mother. She worked long hours, trying to work extra just to get as much money as she could. Finally, after my mom had to bail my dad out for a DUI and resisting arrest, she left him. Having our own place was a relief. There were no fights, nothing being thrown and broken, and no scraping together money for food after having spent it all on alcohol. We were happy, and all were doing pretty well. My mom even had her glow coming back to her, and it made me happy. So, after about a year in our new place, my mom had saved up enough for us to go on a family vacation. Just three of us. We all enjoyed going to the park or going fishing together, so we agreed that a road trip to a national park would be perfect for us. We even went shopping for some good supplies and hiking clothes and shoes. We made plans to hike through this park, stopping at one of the gazebos for lunch and then continuing on. We even found out they had fishing pole rentals, so we could fish there too. We were all very excited for this. As I mentioned, it was myself, a 14-year-old female, my younger sister Bailey, who was 11, and my mom going on a trip. We were at the entrance checking our packs, making sure we had everything when he approached. He was wearing what you would normally expect someone to wear at a large hiking park. He introduced himself as Dave, and asked if we were from around here. My mom said no and explained that we were here on vacation. Dave explained how he was from the state, but that this was one of his favorite parks because of the views from the top of the cliffs. As he continued to talk, I could see my mom was intrigued by the guy. It was the look on her face when she got that male attention that made her feel special. I couldn't say that I understood at the time, but as an adult, I do now. However, something about him made my skin crawl. I didn't know what it was. He seemed really nice. He said all the right things to my mom and to us, but when he looked at Bailey and I, his eyes just felt wrong. It wasn't simple eye contact, but more like a predator watching its prey. Every time he glanced in our direction, my stomach would churn. He talked my mom into letting him walk with us, which I didn't approve of. I was already upset that this was now becoming less of our mother-daughter vacation, but it was because of this guy, of all people. He offered to show us a less traveled viewpoint, and my mom was intrigued. I tried squeezing my mom's hand to get her attention and tell her that I didn't want to, but she just looked at me, smiled, and mouthed, "It's okay." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that as long as she was around, we were safe, but this guy was not right. And it was clouding my confidence and clouding my mother's judgment. For about an hour or so, We trekked along with this guy doing his damnedest to woo my mother. He was telling her the history of the park, told her about his childhood and going there with his mother. And the whole time, Bailey and I refused to leave each other's side. I could tell by her eyes that she didn't trust this man either. We both tried everything we could to express our discomfort to our mom, praying that she would telepathically understand, or at least sense how uncomfortable we were feeling, but nothing seemed to work. Dave just continued to smile at us and include us in the conversation, no matter how much we ignored him. But then we had one last chance to convince our mom. We stopped at a shelter to have lunch when Dave mentioned another trail that had an amazing view of the mountain, but it was a short drive away. He offered to take us there, or said that we could follow him out there, claiming it was a view you had to see when you visited this state. I just remember how scared Bailey looked, and she shook her head at me. I knew that I had to be the problem child. I immediately cut them off to shout, "No, Mom! This was supposed to be our trip!" My mom looked at me surprised by my outburst. I told her that neither of us wanted to go anywhere with this guy. My mom grabbed my hand and squeezed it, and she apologized to Dave. She told him how important this trip was for us, and would talk it over with us first. Dave again smiled and said that he understood. He said that he would continue down the trail, but if we wanted to go, he would meet us at the entrance in about 2 hours. My mom agreed and said that we would meet him there. He waved at us and said that it was nice to meet us and then walked off. Once he was out of view, I told my mom how I felt. I remember being almost in tears as I told her how I felt about this guy. I would look over at Bailey for affirmation and she just kept nodding in agreement. To my surprise, my mom nodded and said that she understood. She explained, as we ate, how she started getting an uneasy feeling herself, but had been fighting it, not wanting her trust issues to ruin a friendly interaction. She promised that she had no intentions on going with him outside the park, and there was such a huge relief when she said that. She suggested that we eat fast, that way we could hurry back to the entrance before the 2 hours, and leave before he got there. I never choked down a sandwich so fast in my life. We all walked the rest of the trail determined to get back quickly. We hardly stopped to look at our surroundings, which was disappointing, but I also understood. I just wanted to get out of there. When we reached the parking lot, Mom told us to get in the car and lock the doors. I didn't know what she was doing, but I watched her walk to the building at the entrance. I remember going there when we first arrived. You could buy souvenirs and supplies there, so I thought it was odd that my mom chose to stop in there. I was nervous, constantly looking around hoping that Dave wouldn't show up. Finally, my mom came jogging back to the car. She smiled at us and said everything was fine and that we were out of there. I was happy when Dave finally walked away, but leaving that park without seeing him again lifted such a huge weight off of my shoulders. I honestly felt like there was something sinister about him. Something that I had no proof of, but I knew that he was bad. Hang in with me here because this is relevant, I promise. Several years later, when I was 19, I was sitting at home with my mom on a day off. Bailey was still in school. We'd been watching one of those true crime shows. I don't remember which one, but it was similar to America's Most Wanted. What I saw nearly sent me into a panic attack. I heard my mom make a sound and I looked up at the TV. There, on the screen, was Dave. Except his real name wasn't Dave. He was wanted for the murders of a mother and her 2 daughters in a neighboring state. What's worse, the murders happened just 2 months after we met him. And to make it worse, they were on vacation, not from that state. Once that episode was over, with no update on it, I ran to the computer to look him up by the name given from the show. Since it had aired, he had been arrested and had confessed to the murders. I thought I was going to be sick. This man that walked with us several years ago at that park, the man that offered to drive the three of us somewhere secluded, had killed a mother and her 2 young daughters. That, very easily, could have been us. There were new articles from the state the women were from, and where they were found, detailing what happened, what evidence there was, and it was all just so eye-opening. I remember yelling at my mom about it. I wasn't exactly mad at her, but more so just scared about the entire situation. If my mom hadn't refused his offer, where would we be right now? And that off feeling my sister and I had that whole time, there was a reason for it. We just didn't know at the time. I ended up calling some kind of non-emergency number for the state that he was charged in to try and figure out where I could report our experience. I knew he was already locked up, but since he may have tried a very similar thing on us that he did with his victims, I wanted it on record. I was able to get a hold of somebody, and I told them everything we remembered, but I never heard anything else from them, so I don't know if it made a difference. I also learned, at that time, that my mom had gone into that building to report to someone there that there was a strange man following us and trying to get us to leave with them. I'm still curious if they ever found him there, too. Hell, I'm curious if there were more victims that haven't been found and that he hasn't mentioned. It's truly a terrifying thought, and the guilt of knowing we were lucky to get away from him, but couldn't do anything about it either, has been something that has always weighed heavily on my mind. Now that I'm an adult, I still go on walks or hikes with friends or my husband, but that experience has always stuck in my mind. Now, if I ever get that off feeling, I don't question those instincts. There's a reason that it's telling me to run, and I would rather get out of that situation first, before I question it. Hi, Raven. I've been binging on your podcast for a few months now, and I just want you to know that I'm hooked. It's my absolute favorite to listen to these days. Thank you. My story is about a knock on the door that honestly scarred me for life. I apologize for the length. To set the scene, first, I don't mind telling you where we used to live, as we don't live anywhere close to this town anymore. It was March of 2013. My husband at the time and I, we are now divorced, lived in Brunswick, which is a small town in Maryland. We rented a house on a fairly busy road through the town. On the right of our house was a hardware store, which sat on the corner of our street that opened at 7 a.m., and to the left was a fairly large house that had been turned into 6 apartments inside. The house we were renting was a 2-story early 1900s home that had been renovated. When you walked in the front door, there was a hallway with stairs to the left, and on either side of the hallway and stairs was a living room. Yes, we had 2 living rooms. The left living room was our TV room. The right was more of a decorative second sitting area. You could walk through the sitting area on the right to reach the kitchen, or you could go straight down the hallway. Connected to the kitchen was a small laundry room with a back door that led to our backyard. The back door was wood with the paned glass from midway to the top. And the backyard was fairly large, and there was an enormous deck outside our back door that we used for entertaining. Upstairs were the 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, but they aren't relevant to the story. The house was set a ways back from the sidewalk, probably about 30 or 40 feet. So, approaching from either side of the street, you couldn't see the house until you were passing. You would just see the hardware store and the apartment complex. It looked like a large gap was between the buildings until you got closer, and you could see our house set back from the road. Unless you were standing in front of our house or directly in front of either building to the side, you couldn't see our home. The setup to the house doesn't really have anything to do with the story per se. I'm just trying to set the mental image for what's about to happen. Living in our house was myself, my husband, and our dog named Snoopy. And Snoopy was, for lack of a better word, a derpy dog. He was half lab and half basset. Just imagine the body and feet of a basset hound, with the head and coloring of a yellow lab, but the ears of a basset hound. And that's exactly what he looked like, and he was a really funny-looking pooch. Snoopy was a sweetheart hound, and not only would he never hurt a fly, but despite being a hound, he never really barked either. I was heavily pregnant and expecting our first child to be born in April the next month. It was that time of year in Maryland, when it's starting to warm up outside for springtime, but we had just had some snowfall a week or so before. My husband worked in Washington, D.C. as a police officer and would commute using the Amtrak train, which was walking distance from where we lived. I had just quit my job as a grocery store deli clerk a few weeks prior due to pregnancy concerns, and because we had planned on me being a stay-at-home mom for the first few years of our child's life. It was a typical Tuesday. My husband woke up early at around 3 a.m. to get ready for work, and left about an hour later, around 4 a.m., to catch the train to Washington, D.C. Of course, myself being 8 months pregnant and miserable, I watched him get ready for work and told him goodbye as he left the bathroom and headed downstairs. I rolled over and quickly fell back to sleep with Snoopy snoring at my feet. The next thing I know, I'm woken up by someone knocking on what sounds like the front door. And Snoopy is still lying on the bed, but his head is perked up and his big old ears are at attention. I rolled over and glanced at the clock, noting that it's 6 a.m. I think to myself, oh hell no, I'm not getting up for this. With the hardware store on one side of us and the apartments on the other, not to mention being the time the hardware store opened, I immediately think that someone must have the wrong building, and I intend to ignore the knocker. I tell Snoopy to lay back down, and I roll back over trying to do the same. Of course, the knocking didn't stop. No. It got louder and harder. This goes on for about 3 to 5 minutes, with the intensity of the knocking getting worse. At this point, I'm an angry 8-month pregnant tired woman, and I don't appreciate being woken up at the crack of dawn for no good reason. Being so late in my pregnancy, I couldn't get comfortable at night, so a good night's sleep was impossible. I'm about to get out of bed to go yell at whoever it was outside that they have the wrong house, when I notice that Snoopy is growling. I've never seen this dog growl in his whole 4 years on this earth. Of course, I don't heed Snoopy's warning as I'm angry, half asleep, and exhausted. I drag myself out of bed, and Snoopy jumps down as well, immediately taking off downstairs, growling and barking. Again, this is unlike him, but in my delirium, I didn't think anything of it. In the meantime, the knocking has now turned into banging. Loud, angry banging. I make my way downstairs to the front door. Why I chose to do what I did next, I will never know. I attribute it to exhaustion and anger about being woken up, completely ignoring the red flags of the situation. What happened next was very fast. Like, in the span of less than 10 minutes fast. Now, we lived in a very safe town, so I didn't even think about peeping out the window to see who was on the porch. I know. I unlocked the front door and turned the handle, preparing to open the door and inform whoever it is trying to knock my door down that they have the wrong house. Immediately, upon turning the doorknob, the front door shoves inward at me, hard, like the person on the other side is trying to push their way in. At the same time, Snoopy is at the door, snarling and barking. My adrenaline kicks in and I realize that this person is trying to force their way into my home. Thankfully, I was standing in front of the door when I unlocked it, intending to just stick my head outside. I somehow managed to throw my body weight against the door and fight it shut, and then lock it again before the person could enter. Now, I'm wide awake and terrified. While Snoopy is at the door freaking out, I run to the sitting room and peek through the blinds to the front porch, where I see a man at my door. This guy looks to be in his early 40s with unkempt shoulder-length greasy hair and a bushy graying beard. He's wearing torn-up jeans, very old beat-up brown work shoes, a white t-shirt, and a black winter coat open in the front. He was dirty from head to toe with this look of anger etched on his face. He also had our snow shovel in his hands. Before, this man was just pounding on the door, but now he had grabbed our snow shovel from our front porch and was repeatedly bashing the shovel end against the front door as hard as he could. I was frozen for all of maybe 15 seconds, unsure of what to do. I had left my phone upstairs and we didn't have a house phone. My body must have forgotten that I was pregnant thanks to the adrenaline, because I ran up the stairs faster than I thought possible. My first thought was to check for my husband's service weapon. There had been times that he forgot it at home before, and I was hoping today was one of those occasions. But of course, when I checked his bedside drawer, it was gone. Quickly, I grabbed my cell phone from my side of the bed, and I immediately dialed 911. I ran, again, back down the stairs to the front door where this man was still trying to break down the door. I'm panicked, trying to relay what is happening to the woman who answered at the 911 center, with this man beating my door down in the process, and my dog is still losing his mind. While I'm on the phone with 911, I run to the kitchen and grab a large knife from the block just in case I need to defend myself. As I'm heading back to the front door, the sound of the shovel against the metal door stops. I peek out the window of the TV room in time to see the man disappear around the side of our house toward the backyard. At this point, the police are on their way, and should be arriving in just a few minutes. Thank goodness for small towns. I walk through my house back to the kitchen, checking the windows, watching as this man makes his way to my backyard. I enter the kitchen and look into the laundry room, and I see him standing outside my laundry room window looking right at me. My heart is beating out of my chest at this point. We lock eyes, and the man takes 3 steps backwards from my window, not breaking eye contact. He then turns away from me and continues around the corner of my house, while I'm watching his progression through the windows, through the backyard, and up onto the deck to the back door. I move toward the laundry room and stand in the doorway and watching this man approach my back door. He tries the doorknob. Locked. He looks up at me again through the glass of the back door. He looks down to my hand where I'm holding the knife, and then locks eyes with me as he makes a fist and punches a hole through one of the panes of the glass. I hear sirens coming in the distance, and I scream to the 911 operator that this man is at the back door staring at me, and that he's just broken the glass. And Snoopy comes rushing in from his guard post at the front door, up to the back door, and is snarling at this intruder trying to break in. The pane of glass the intruder broke first was the farthest away from the doorknob on the inside. Everything is slow motion for me at this point. Just as the man breaks the middle pane of glass, the operator tells me that the police have just pulled up out front. I run down the hallway, unlock the front door, and throw it open, screaming to the police, "He just broke the glass in my back door trying to get in." The police immediately took off around the side of the house to the backyard. They had the man on the ground and handcuffed in just a minute or two. While I was out front yelling at the cops, he had managed to break 2 more panes of glass and unlock my back door. But thankfully the police got to him before he was able to open it. I thanked the operator and hung up. I talked to the police and explained everything that had happened, and he was arrested. The man was intoxicated, and tried to tell the cops that this was his house, and that he didn't know anyone was inside. That was his excuse, anyway. I learned from the cops that this guy was arrested several days prior for breaking into another person's basement through the window, supposedly trying to find somewhere to sleep. Of course, I called my husband afterwards, and he immediately caught the next train home to make sure I was okay. When I told my husband what happened, though, I left out the part about me opening the door because I didn't want to look like an idiot. There's a reason we aren't married anymore. After it happened, I often wondered what his intentions were if he got in. What would have happened if I wasn't able to get the front door shut and locked again? I was visibly very pregnant, and even though he lied to the police, this man knew I was in the house. He tried to force the door open on me. He heard Snoopy going crazy, not to mention staring at me as he broke the glass out of my door to unlock it. These days, I try not to think about it anymore. It's been almost 12 years since this happened, and I still can't handle the sound of knocking, whether it be someone knocking on my door or my kids making a knocking sound while they're playing. The sound sends me into a panic attack. It's so bad that whenever I get deliveries, like Amazon or DoorDash for example, I specifically state in the delivery instructions, do not knock. If you're listening to this story, please don't ever open the door without checking who is outside first. Even if it's 6 a.m. and you think nothing bad can happen during daylight hours. Working in retail and food establishments really teaches you how many people have absolutely no concept of what closing time means. But there was one customer that I will never forget who took it to a whole new level. I worked at a pretty popular coffee shop in the northern US area. It wasn't a chain place like the Green Mermaid, but if you lived up here, you knew the place, and many even preferred it. Most days we closed at 9 p.m. sharp. Anyone who's worked in food service knows that closing time isn't actually when you get to leave, though. You have to shut everything down, clean, restock, close out the register, and a million other small tasks that take an hour after closing. That's why we would start our closing procedure around 8:30. And this isn't just something us baristas started to do. This came from management. Just wanted to put that out there before anyone says that this was our fault. We would clean the espresso machines, count the pastries for donations, sweep, and mop, and then dump the remaining coffee because no one wants our old burnt coffee anyways. If we got late orders, 98% of the time they would go through the drive-thru, and that late, it was typically hot chocolate or tea orders, not coffee. But when we got the random espresso person, we obliged. No grumbles about it. At least they didn't come in and muck up the floors. But this one guy, he made closing infuriating. We referred to him as Last Minute Larry, which seemed to fit anyways since according to his credit card, his name was Lawrence. Like clockwork, Larry would show up at 8:58 p.m., or sometimes right as we were locking the doors. This isn't an exaggeration either. He showed up between 8:58 and 9 p.m. He always ordered the same thing, a large vanilla latte with an extra shot and caramel drizzle. It doesn't sound complicated, but when you've already cleaned and broken down everything, it means pulling everything back out re-cleaning it all and pushing your closing time back at least 15 minutes. It was maddening. There was one time, on a whim, that I made his drink a little earlier, expecting him to show up. So, as he swiped his card to pay, I handed him his drink, smiling, thinking I did a good thing. But, again, he didn't thank me. He took a drink and immediately complained that it wasn't hot enough and told us to remake it. So, now he not only wasted our time, but even our supplies. We had to make a whole new drink, all because I tried to make it 1 minute earlier. And that's it. I was finishing it as he was paying. But even with all that, the worst part, in my opinion, was his smug smile. He knew exactly what he was doing. It was one thing if they actually apologized for showing up late, or got something simple like a triple shot or tea, but he wanted a latte with whip and drizzle. And not once did he apologize or ever thank us. He would say things like, "Oh, made it just in time," and then would slurp it so loud as he walked out, not saying another word to us. This went on for months. My manager Jenny was too nice to turn him away, saying we technically weren't closed, so we had to serve him. Was he a jerk and ungrateful? Well, yeah, but she wasn't wrong. So every night we'd finish up, but I actually stopped cleaning the espresso machine until the doors were locked. Then, for just a sliver of a moment, we got what we considered a satisfying moment. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. We had signs posted inside and out, and even the drive-thru showing our holiday hours. It said that we were closing early on that Wednesday at around 5 p.m., and that we would be closed on Thursday. Like I said, the signs had been up for weeks. So there we were, a little past 5 p.m., and we already had the doors locked and were in the midst of our closing tasks. I was out in the lobby, mopping as we were just about to finish with everything, when I heard a loud thud. It was the sound of our door being pulled on. It was Larry. He looked at the door confused and pointed at me, gesturing to open it, as he stood there smiling. I walked up to the door, also smiling, and told him that we were already closed, and I apologized. The smile quickly turned into annoyance. He said I was wrong, that we didn't close until 9. I explained to him the hours for the holidays, and even pointed to the sign on the door. The look on his face as he read it, seriously, I've never seen someone look so personally offended by a closed sign. I guess he thought he was a special circumstance, because he still demanded a manager, as he stood on the other side of the door. So I went and got Jenny and explained to her what was going on. I followed Jenny back to the front and listened to the conversation as I finished mopping. He was yelling so loud that I could hear him by the counter, which is as far back from the door as you could be without going into the back of the store. He kept saying how it wasn't fair, that he was a paying customer and demanded his coffee. Then, he made it sound like we needed him. We needed his $4.12 that he gave us every night. And then he started threatening to go to a different coffee shop. Thankfully, Jenny stood her ground. She said we closed at 5. It's been posted, and he was way past 5. It wasn't like his normal where he came in 2 minutes till closing. So, she refused to serve him. She even apologized that he didn't see the signs and offered to give him $2 off if he came in on Friday, but he declined. She tried to end the conversation there because there was no point in continuing with it. She told him to have a better night. He called her some colorful names, kicked the door, and then walked back to his truck. Jenny was standing in the middle of the store and was moving the tables back, as I had already mopped that section. We started talking about what just happened, but he still sat in his truck right in front of the door. It was kind of intimidating. Was he going to just stay there until we left? Was he crazy enough to do something to us when we did? I asked Jenny about it, and she said that if he didn't leave in the next few minutes, she would call it in, not feeling comfortable with him being there either. Then, as I finished mopping with her following behind, adjusting the chairs and tables, Larry started revving his truck. I was beginning to feel a bit nervous about the whole thing, and told Jenny that she should probably call someone. She nodded in agreement, and as she started talking, there was a loud crash, and glass came flying at us. I immediately ducked, not knowing what was happening. After a couple seconds, I stood up and looked around. Larry's crazy ass had driven right through our front door. He barely missed Jenny. He stopped maybe a foot before her. A table was the only thing wedged between her and the truck. We both stood frozen looking around the lobby when Larry got out, walked up to the counter, and in a calm voice asked for his normal latte. I wanted to scream at this man. I wanted to punch him and tell him to leave, but it was like my feet were attached to weights and my mouth was sewed shut. I just couldn't. Yet Jenny stood up, sighed, and just said, "Okay." She walked around to the other side of the counter and started firing up the espresso machine. She stopped and looked over at me, saying, "Hey, Kenneth, I already put the whip away. Could you go grab some? It should be in the fridge by my paperwork." At first, I thought it was an odd request because we kept the whip in the fridge behind the counter, and the ones in the back were to be used when we ran out. But something in her eyes told me just to do it. And so with the weights finally off my feet, I headed to the back. I went to grab the whip from the fridge when it finally made sense to me. There was no paperwork by this fridge. At least, none she was working on. The only paperwork nearby was the printout that was posted on the wall about emergency situations and what to do. Was this her way at hinting to me to call the cops? Well, either way, I did just that. I called 911, told them the address, and mentioned there was a break-in, and then put the phone down to run and give her the whip, before Larry thought something was wrong. After I gave it to her, she thanked me, and we seemed to have a conversation with our eyes. She raised her eyebrows as she took it from me, and I nodded that it was all done. She told me to go get the broom and to start sweeping, so I went to the back and grabbed the phone again. The operator said there was already someone on the way. I grabbed the broom and dustpan and slowly tried to move around the tables again so I could sweep better when I saw headlights outside. The police quickly pulled up, without their lights on, and got out. Jenny tried to delay some, using the whip I brought her because it was frozen. But Larry seemed completely oblivious to everything. As Jenny finished the drink, the police had already entered and asked what was going on. Larry turned around, his coffee in hand, and he was back to smiling, telling the cops that he was getting his coffee. I immediately blurted out that he had driven his truck through the doors because we closed at 5. The cops nodded and immediately moved to arrest Larry, trying to put his hands behind his back. They asked him to put his coffee down, and they ended up having to pry it from him. Jenny and I watched from behind the counter again, as they struggled with Larry, all while he kept shouting how he just wanted his damn coffee. They finally got him into the cruiser and took down everything that happened. And thankfully, the owner even had cameras, but Larry didn't deny it. He said he did it to get his coffee, and that he wasn't even wrong for it either. We were supposed to be closed at 5 p.m., home around 6 or so, and get to enjoy a nice evening followed by a nice holiday. But instead, Jenny and I were there until almost 10 p.m., talking to the police, the owner, who we called of course, and the tow service to take his truck, not to mention all the cleanup that we had to do. The time after that was definitely a bit awkward. The owner decided to just keep it closed over the weekend until they could get either a permanent or better temp door and wall, because otherwise we would just have a gaping hole and we would be freezing the entire time. I heard the county actually charged Larry for destruction of property and reckless endangerment. He had also been banned from other places for his aggressive behavior, so I guess it was just our turn. Thankfully, we never saw Larry again, or anyone like that. Jenny seemed to be more willing to put her foot down to people coming in at the last moment, which I liked. She really set the expectation, and I feel like people knew not to test her. I've had some pushback on both sides of this too, saying that it was our fault for not just helping him. And maybe they're right. Could we have served him because it was still before closing? Sure. And we did, and got over it. But was he right to drive through the building and damn near kill someone to be serviced? No, absolutely not. That is never a solution. If you need coffee that bad and that late, maybe consider stashing some instant coffee at home in case of an emergency. Hi, Raven. Listening to you read so many amazing stories that people have submitted about their paranormal or glitch experiences has motivated me to submit another one of my experiences. The 2 stories I've submitted so far have been glitch or paranormal stories. The other was a visitation. And this one is a dream-like, out-of-body experience or astral projection story. All stories submitted are true, but definitely bizarre. I wonder if any of your viewers have ever encountered an astral projection kind of dream-like experience. If so, I would love to hear about them. This happened on July 29th, 2018. I believe this started off as a dream but evolved into something else entirely. I went to bed on Saturday night and woke up on the following Sunday morning very late. It was almost 10 in the morning. I have never slept that late before. When I came downstairs into the kitchen, I was still in a very groggy sleep state. My husband was unloading the dishwasher and remarked how surprised he was that I slept so late. This is when he told me what time it was. I was shocked that I still felt completely exhausted, even though I slept this late. Another part of me couldn't believe that I slept so late and was wasting the day away. The night before, we had planned to take a ride to Beavertail in Jamestown, to enjoy the beautiful weather. After a few sips of coffee, I began to help my husband with the rest of the dishes in the sink. We were chatting about the kids, laughing about various things, and at one point, he brought up my deceased aunt. We began to laugh about her broken English and the way in which she pronounced his name. Mid-laugh, I immediately stopped in my tracks and remembered that I had a dream about her just last night. Slowly, bits and pieces of the dream came back to me, and I started to tell my husband about it. In this dream-like state, I went on a riverboat in the Danube River. I was with other people that I didn't know and a riverboat captain. I was not with friends or family, just other strangers. We were traveling along, and at one point, I couldn't wait to get off the boat because I had to use the bathroom. As the riverboat docked, the captain gave some information, or instructions, but I can't remember what he said. I got off the boat and looked around me. It was daytime, the sky was blue, the temperature was warm but not hot. There were no clouds in the pale blue sky that stretched out as far as I could see. I'm not sure what time it was, but it seemed to be very early in the afternoon. People were shopping, walking all around and enjoying the day. The ground under my feet was old cobblestone. There were shops all around this area where the riverboat was docked. I really had to go to the bathroom, and that's all I could think about as I stepped off the riverboat. My eyes scanned the area as I was looking around for a place I could use the restroom. As an aside, I do find it a bit odd to dream of having to go to the bathroom in this much detail. In any event, from where I was standing, to the right, I spotted an establishment not far from where the riverboat was docked. I thought it was a bar of some sort. I saw that it had both a front door and a side door. I went around to the front door as I thought the side door might be used as an exit. These doors were large. They were somewhat ornate, wooden doors with large handles. I opened the door to what I thought was a bar and walked in, hoping they would let me use their bathroom. To my utter shock and disbelief, when walking in, right near where I was about to turn down a small hallway or corner, standing there was my aunt. This is the aunt that died in March of 2015. I was absolutely floored to be bumping into her. "What are you doing here?" I asked in an audibly loud and shocked voice. She telepathically asked me to hush my voice because she was there working. When she said that she was working, it didn't register what she really meant. It wasn't like she had a job in that place, nor was she dressed for work in this sort of establishment. I told her that I had to use the bathroom, and that it was a pressing emergency as my bladder felt like it was going to burst. I promised her I'd be right out, and that we could continue our conversation. In my dream or astral projection, or whatever you want to call it, she was very much real. She looked as real as any living person. I had no reason to believe she would vanish while I was in the bathroom. I knew when I was finished using the ladies' room that she'd be right where I left her at the end of the bar, standing right next to the gray-haired, sullen, middle-aged man. And she was. Upon my swift return, I became more aware of what she was wearing. She had on a bright plum/purple-colored blazer and matching skirt business suit. I also noticed the blazer and skirt was too large for her tiny frame. She also had on the same color of nail polish. I found the suit color and nail polish choice totally out of character for her. This was not a color that she would ever wear, nor had I ever remembered seeing her in this color. Also, in life, she always wore very light colored nail polish, if any polish at all. As I examined her more closely, she appeared to be wearing fake nails, and the manicure didn't seem professional. The polish seemed to be thick, and melting or smudged. Her clothing choice was very out of character for a woman who was very fashion-forward in life. As I moved beyond the superficial details of her manicure and attire, I noticed that her face was simply perfect. She had no wrinkles. Her skin was flawless and it radiated a soft, glowing light. She still looked like the 88-year-old woman that I knew, but something about her seemed far more evolved. We had more telepathic conversations as we stood at the end of the bar. I asked her about what she had been doing since she died. I was fully aware in the moment during my dream that she was not alive, and she had been dead since 2015. My aunt told me about what she'd been up to since her death. I knew that when I returned or woke up, I wouldn't be able to remember this part of what she said with complete clarity. She let me know that even though she was telling me about what happens after you die, it wasn't meant for me to completely remember. I do, however, remember that she explained that after you die, you go through this big white building with huge pillars, and you go through some sort of debriefing process. There's some sort of cleansing process that everyone goes through, like removing the negative aspects of human existence and negative experiences off of you. Then you have a choice of what you can do based on your life review. I guess she chose to do work on the other side as an angel or spirit guide. I think she was helping the gray-haired middle-aged man that was sitting at the bar, but he couldn't see her. Then, our telepathic conversation took a turn into various aspects of my life. I seemed a bit frustrated with the direction of my life. Here I was, happily married, 3 kids, accomplished in my profession and using my education in different ways, but still somehow I felt lost. I believe a lot had to do with the fact that I was still grieving her death, and nothing seemed to matter much to me. I just felt stuck. I asked her what my life's purpose was. I clearly remember her telling me to stop trying to look for my purpose outside of myself, that my purpose would find me. I started to cry, but I'm not really sure why. We were in a public area and she told me to stop crying because the people could see me crying and getting upset, but they couldn't see her. That statement alone I found unnerving. People could see me, but they couldn't see her. Even in that moment, I felt that was a strange thing to hear her say. I knew that I had to pull myself together. I also somehow knew the riverboat would be leaving soon to take us back. My aunt hugged me. She asked if I felt it. I told her that I had. What she was referring to was the angelic hug that she had just given me. It penetrated my soul and calmed my spirit. You see, when an angel hugs you, it's a feeling that permeates your whole being down to the depths of your soul and lingers for a long while after the hug is over. It's an otherworldly sort of feeling that cannot fully be explained. After she hugged me, we continued our conversation. I asked if she has seen other relatives that have since passed on and told her that I'm thinking of her and them often. We talked telepathically until I knew it was really time for me to go. Then she just disappeared. I walked through the crowded pub area to the side exit. The moment I arrived at the side exit door, there she was. She was standing to the left of the door. I hugged her again and told her I loved her and kissed her cheek. I asked her to say hello to my father and names of some of the relatives that had crossed over. We said our goodbyes, smiled, and I exited the building feeling better than I had in a long time. As I walked over to where the riverboat was docked, I realized I was getting pretty hungry. I wondered if there was enough time for me to get food before the riverboat departed. That's when I looked down at what I was wearing. I realized I was wearing a white lab coat. I reached into the right front pocket, and inside there was food. I was planning on buying a spinach wrap, but there was already a prepackaged flatbread tuna and spinach wrap in my pocket. I'm not sure where or how I got it, as it wasn't there before. In fact, I wasn't even wearing the white lab coat before. It was possible my aunt was behind this. She knows I'm a vegetarian. In life, she always brought food for me when we went to certain places. Once, she even brought food for me to a repass. It was the repass after her older sister's funeral. My aunt was always concerned that people would forget that I was vegetarian, and I wouldn't have anything to eat at gatherings. So, it wouldn't be a stretch to think my aunt was behind the flatbread spinach wrap. As I unwrapped the flatbread sandwich, I removed the moisture barrier paper, rolled it up, and I ate it. It was incredibly satisfying, like far more satisfying than anything I ever remembered eating. I finished the sandwich and continued walking towards the boat. I took another look around and I noticed my aunt was completely gone. I stepped into the boat, looked around one last time, and noticed the people were still talking and walking and shopping in the area near the bar from which I came. The boat was filled up as the other passengers were seated on the riverboat and prepared to head back from where we came from. The riverboat captain was ready to go, and he made an announcement. Moments after, we were on our way back. Although this was an extremely vivid experience, I don't know why I never questioned where the other riverboat passengers came from, who they were visiting, and I never asked the captain any questions. After slowly piecing together this dream the next morning, and recalling as many details to my husband as I had remembered, I went upstairs to shower, dress, and get ready to go to Jamestown for the day. I still had this nagging feeling that wouldn't leave me. That experience had me obsessed in trying to figure out where I had been. So I grabbed my phone and started Googling bars or lounges on the water near the Danube River. When I Googled it, I was shocked to see images of a place in Vienna, Austria, that I literally visited in my dream. I never even knew how long the Danube River was. What's more is that I never knew that the Danube River went all the way into Austria. I thought it didn't go any further than Hungary. I've never been to Austria before in my life, and I'm certainly quite ignorant to the geography of this part of the world. What I came across in my Google search was a place called Heaven's Pub in Vienna, Austria. The Google images were exactly what I saw in my dreams. Both wood doors in the front and side. The area where the bathrooms were located. Everything was exactly as it was in my dream. And to make matters even more unusual, there is one of the Google images that was a barrel. On top of the barrel was a purple-colored candle with a flame with melted wax. This was the same color of the oversized business suit that my aunt was wearing. It was also the same color as the melted-looking nail polish she had on. So, earlier in recounting this dream/astral projection, I stated that my aunt said that my purpose would find me, and that I didn't have to worry about anything. 2 days after this experience, I got a phone call from a cohort member for my doctoral program. I was surprised, as this is not a person I was in regular contact with. She asked me if I would be interested in teaching a graduate science course at the university. I was like, yeah, whatever, as long as it didn't interfere with my regular work. I didn't think twice about it, as I had already had so much going on. Well, certain tenure-track professors' positions are extremely difficult to get, as there are unions involved. The cohort member's boss ended up contacting me the next day and told me that she saw some of my work. She's been working behind the scenes and has been trying to get me hired for this position for 2 years. The interview was a mere formality, and I was hired instantly. It all seemed surreal. What makes things even more strange is that the school's color is the exact color that my aunt was wearing. I guess she was right. She told me that my purpose would come to me. Sure enough, it did. I never even looked for this position. It just fell into my lap, and believe me, this is not typical in getting these kinds of professor positions. This was a mind-boggling experience for me. After some thoughtful reflection, I began to come to the conclusion that our relatives that have moved on to the next realm have ways of crossing the veil back into this realm of existence, if and when we need them. They also provide us with plenty of signs, use dreams, or allow us to experience things like astral projection to reach out to us when we need their spiritual guidance the most. We just have to be open to them. Someday, I hope to visit Austria, and when I do, I'll be sure to visit Heaven's Pub. I'm sure I'll feel her presence there no matter how much time has passed. Hello, Raven. I've been trying to submit this story for a while now, but never have been able to put into words, and I'm sorry in advance that it's so long. I'm almost 21 years old, female, and have always been sensitive to the paranormal. The reason why I have never been able to put this story into a story format is because it has left me so scarred that every waking moment I beg to whatever gods exist that it never happens to me again. I know to some people that this may not seem like it's a lot. For some background, I am Mexican and Native American mixed with European, and I grew up believing in Native American and Hispanic folklore, and I knew what to not mess with to not activate any of these creatures. I know this already sounds like I'm a madman, but just hear me out. I'm going to keep all names confidential, but you will need to know the name of the town I grew up in, San Juan Bautista. This town was primarily Native Americans and Hispanic population before it was colonized and became part of the El Camino Real, which was where the Catholic churches went along the entirety of California and built missions to convert these people to Catholicism. If you're a Californian and see those bells on the side of the highway, you know what I mean. Anyways, the earliest paranormal experience I had that I can remember was when I was in first grade or kindergarten. I don't remember the exact age. I attended an after-school catechism at the San Juan Mission. I used to always hear whispers whenever I would step foot in the little small graveyard in the back of the church. It was so eerie. It was covered from the sun by tall oak trees, and these graves were at least 200 to 100 years old. Old wooden graves with a giant white wooden cross that stood directly in the middle of all this. We were always allowed to play here for some reason. I always hated it. I always got this weird feeling of never being alone, even if my classmates were far gone. It wasn't until I was older that the graveyard was no longer accessible. I then found out that they discovered many Native American bodies stacked onto each other buried in this yard. Because of this occurrence, I always wondered if that is the reason why I began experiencing what I did. Maybe I accidentally stepped on a grave. Maybe I picked something up that I shouldn't have. I don't know. I was too young to remember. After this, I began experiencing what I now know as shadow people, and some I still cannot identify. Whenever I would go to my great-grandmother's house, I slept in the second-story bedroom that faced directly at the town cemetery, still in San Juan. To keep it short, I always experienced shadow people, but this particular night in 2020 led to a whirlpool of a crap show. I always knew her house was haunted. She always said it was too. The first was me walking into her bedroom. The lights were off, her cat was waiting for me at the edge of the bed, and all of a sudden a bottle cap goes flying off of her dresser and hits the cat directly in the head. The cat starts hissing and running around, and I had the worst gut feeling. I dropped all of my bags and ran and told her. No, I didn't bump the dresser, it was on the other side of the room, and it flew further than it should have. And no windows were open either, so there was no air draft. The next time I spent the night, I went straight upstairs to drop my bags off so I could eat dinner with my sister and my grandmother. Before I could even turn the lights on, I felt uneasy. It doesn't help that my grandmother has a collection of porcelain baby dolls, like in the horror movies. It once again felt like someone was watching me. As soon as I turned on the lights, I saw a horrible face in the only window in the room, but it was blacked out. I only saw a grin on the face, and its neck was so elongated. As soon as it saw me, it flew down the window and disappeared. I nearly had to change my underwear. I ran downstairs and told them, which caused us to sage the house. I cannot figure out what the entity was to this day. This is a second-story window. Its neck must have been extremely long, and that's just disturbing to think about. Of course, here and there I would experience other little things, but about a month or so after that, it was already the beginning of 2021. I finally was able to move back into my mom's house. She's a nurse and was dealing with COVID patients and didn't want us exposed. Mind you, my mother's house is brand new, but it's built on top of land that I have no clue if there's any significance. This is where the bad stuff began. I very much so believed I dragged in bad spirits. These occurrences happened to me 1 week after another. The first week began with me babysitting my little brother. He was around 3 or 4 years old. Anytime he would wake up from a nap, and I would immediately take him to my room from my mother's, so I could continue playing Red Dead Redemption probably, he would begin to look up at the corner of my ceiling and scream at the top of his lungs, and point. And I mean scream crying, to where he couldn't have even gotten a breath in. Of course, being like 16 at the time, I didn't know what to do. So I began to panic while also trying to shush him, because it was so abrupt. I would leave the room and he would be fine. But the second I stepped back in, he would point at that same spot and cry. I would have to call my then stepfather or mom to rush home because I was so terrified. The following week, I invited my friend over. Let's call her Tessa. Tessa was also into the paranormal and wanted to do a Ouija board to see if we could talk to whatever spirit it was that was clearly following me, because I was non-stop hearing things and seeing these shadow people. I think that was the stupidest thing we could have done. We had no clue how those boards worked. I knew how to cleanse my own space and ward off spirits, but I didn't know about the whole closing of portals situation. Anyways, we waited until the prime hour, 3 a.m. We got all of our candles, our boards, and some snacks to hold us off. We began to use the board, and unfortunately, nothing really happened. It maybe moved on its own a few times, but it never spelled anything out. Out of frustration, I guess we just tossed the board in the closet and went to bed. I was having a very hard time sleeping. Tessa passed out immediately, and I began to hear a very, very loud scratching noise against my garage door. My window was above the garage door, so I can see the door and if there's anything outside. But there wasn't. It kept getting louder and louder, to the point where, by the time I got the courage to look at my phone, it was already like 7 a.m. The second I heard my mom wake up, I ran downstairs and asked her to please let me see her phone so I could watch the security cameras that we had. Absolutely nothing. There was a bush outside the garage door, and the bush wasn't moving at all, so that rules out the wind pushing the door. And the audio didn't pick anything up either. I legit thought I was going crazy. Another week passed, and I really thought I was in the clear for not being crazy, but of course, it happened again. I was playing video games with friends late at night, prime COVID activities, when we decided to hop off because we had Zoom classes in the morning. I went to the bathroom to wash my face, doing nightly routines, etc. Now, for some layout. My bedroom and my little sister's bedroom were directly next to each other, but the bathroom was on the left side of both of our rooms. Our room was closest to the bathroom. Anyways, as I'm on the toilet just kind of zoning out, I notice shadows of footsteps outside of my door. We always kept the lights dimmed to a low, but enough to see so that the little ones won't trip if they got up in the night. I assumed it was my brother or sister, but the footsteps started to get louder, like running, and it was going back and forth past the door. That's when I began to freak out because, what the hell? That's when I noticed the time was around 3 a.m. After waiting for the footsteps to stop, I ran out of the bathroom, and as I ran out, I could see clear as day my little sister and little brother sleeping in their room. I got the courage to check my mom's room, and she and my stepdad were asleep as well. I was so terrified that there was some demon or something running around my house. I got straight under the covers and hid my face. Now, remember how my little brother was scared at the corners of my room for some reason? Well, I guess I had a nightmare after finally dozing off about the corners of my room. I was walking around my room and it seemed like darkness was just oozing out of the seams of the walls. And I ran further down my house, and it kept getting darker and darker. And when I ran back up the stairs from my room, a small dark figure came out of the corners and chased me into the room. I then woke up from my sleep, and I saw the dark figure was sitting on my chest, and I couldn't breathe. It came extremely close to my face and opened its mouth, and lunged at me at extreme speeds, and everything turned black. I was able to breathe again after opening my eyes, I guess, but I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I chalked it up to sleep paralysis, but it felt so real. I haven't even heard of stories of people's sleep demons moving or getting near to them like that, but I could be wrong. I saged my room and began to read some Bible verses that I knew would help. Shortly after, I was gifted a beautiful rosary by my grandparents from Italy, and all things seemed to be okay. But I was still so petrified. What was that thing? I couldn't be alone in my own home anymore without getting scared of the slightest noise. I did sage every room that I went into after weekly, and always kept that rosary with me at all times. I haven't experienced anything paranormal in a while, and I thank God for that. I think I'm too curious to know what I was experiencing. I will always have a deep connection to the undead for some reason, and that sensitivity will never go away. I am always hesitant to share this story for reasons that may be obvious, but it's still the most bizarre and unsettling event that has ever happened to me. And worse yet, I still can't make sense of what happened or the conclusion of it. I was hiking in a pretty popular national park in New Mexico back in '07. I was in the state for a friend's wedding, and I wanted to stop here before I went back home. It was late September, cool enough in the morning for a light jacket, and warmed up enough to not overheat with it. I'd like to call myself a fairly experienced hiker and rock climber, so I've always kept an eye out for interesting detours, ones that others less experienced may not consider checking out. And about 2 miles into my trek, I noticed something that caught my attention. There was a cliff that hung over part of the trail I was on that had vines and leaves to grow up on one side. That told me that there had been some kind of water flow down the side which helped keep the vines alive. I wanted to see the view from the top, and after circling around for a bit, I found a good place to climb. Once up there, I could see there was certainly a trail that I could follow along and decided to continue to follow it. As I continued along, I saw something else that caught my attention. A subtle path through the grass and fallen leaves, like someone had recently walked through it multiple times. Part of me said that I should stick to the marked trail, but at the same time, that was the type of thing I liked to explore. I wanted to take these other trails that probably weren't actual trails, but others have taken them enough to make it happen. And there must be something there worth seeing for people to take it, right? So that's exactly what I did. I followed the pressed down vegetation for about 10 minutes, taking mental note of distinctive trees or similar to help guide my way back out. I didn't know where this path would take me or even how long it would be. But after about 15 to 20 minutes of walking, I finally found something along this path. Something that I would have never expected to see out there. There was a little girl, who couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, sitting cross-legged on a dirty sleeping bag. She had several toys arranged in front of her. I remember seeing a dirty stuffed rabbit that was looking pretty worn out and lopsided. There was a doll missing an arm and other smaller toys. There was also a small red and blue lunchbox looking thing next to her that had definitely gotten used quite a bit. Her clothes were filthy and didn't look like they fit her. In fact, the jacket that was slung over her shoulders looked like it was an adult woman's jacket. She didn't have shoes on, and I could tell that the bottom of her feet were dark, like they were obviously covered in dirt. Her hair looked like it could be light brown, maybe blonde even, but was very dirty and matted, with leaves sticking out of it. I remember making an audible sound, one of curiosity and sadness, which caused the girl to stand up and face me. At the time of this event, I was actually a preschool teacher and had experience with children. I knew what to do to calm them down, make them feel safe, not feel scared. But this was different. The fear in her eyes was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. This was like a feral animal seeing humans. I knelt and said hello softly, and she backed up, like she was ready to run. I put my hands out, trying to get her to stay and see that I wasn't a threat. I told her my name and slowly pulled my backpack around front and pulled out the bag of trail mix that I always took with me. As soon as I pulled it out, I noticed her attention was back on me. I held it out and she immediately approached and snatched it from my hands, opening it and digging in. I watched her eat a few handfuls until I spoke again, and I asked her if she was lost. She didn't answer. I asked her for her name, and she stopped long enough to shake her head and then continued eating. I asked her if she'd been out there alone, and she nodded. I asked her if she knew her name, or anything about her parents and where she lived, and I got nothing. She would just look at me and not answer. This girl had to have been out there for some time, and surely someone had to be looking for her, right? Maybe she'd gone missing here. Miraculously, she managed to survive on her own. I don't know where the toys or lunchbox had come from, but it had to have been the only thing keeping her going, with how she had them set up around her, like a small child like that would do. Finally, I did my best to slowly explain to her that I wanted to take her to the Rangers. I tried to make the Rangers seem cool and helpful, and after some coaxing, I finally got her to agree. I watched her zip up her sleeping bag, toss all of her items into it, and drag it along behind her. I put my backpack back on and took the sleeping bag from her, and she walked beside me holding my hand. It was somehow soft, but ice cold. I've had kids hold my hand or hug me before, but something felt very different with her. The walk back felt 10 times longer than normal. I'm sure part of it was going back and forth between carrying the sleeping bag or her, as I didn't want her little feet to get hurt on rocks or sticks. We passed a handful of people that looked at us judgingly. I could tell these people probably thought I was just a bad parent with how she looked, but not a single one stopped to ask if we were okay or needed help. When we finally reached the main trail, I tried to explain to the girl what I was going to do, all while smiling to show her it was okay, that this was a good thing for her. Once there, I quietly explained to someone there the situation about finding the girl. He looked skeptical, but then agreed to call for help. We sat on a bench in the front, and I even bought muffins from a nearby shop, which she inhaled, too. The police showed up, with a child caseworker, and I explained everything to them. Where I found her, what I saw. They asked me what all she said, but I told them that she wouldn't speak at all. Another hour or two, they took the girl away in an ambulance while I finished up my statement. I didn't get to tell the girl bye, but she did keep my bag of trail mix. The caseworker took my contact information and said that they would contact me if they had anything further. From there, everyone cleared out, and not having anything left to do, I returned to my car and went to find somewhere to eat by myself. It was such a bizarre experience, and now I had to drive the 4 hours to get home. I ended up calling my sister and my friend to tell them about what happened, and they also thought that it was both sad and bizarre. It would be one thing to find a child that may have been lost on the trail, but she had obviously been there for a while. Weeks, hell, maybe even months. And the fact that she didn't talk made me wonder if it was just fear. Or was she mute? Did she not know how to speak? Maybe she couldn't speak English. I had so many questions. But while this event was something itself, it's what followed that added to my confusion. After a week passed, I hadn't heard from the caseworker. They specifically said they would reach out to me, but never did. I wanted to contact them myself, but I realized I never got their information. They only had mine. So I tried calling the national park first. I explained what happened, and the person that answered seemed to be confused. They said they've been working there for years but have never heard of anything like that being reported. I had to explain that it was something that I reported, not something I heard. They basically just told me that they didn't recall anything like that and matter-of-factly said that the area was known for some dangerous terrain and wasn't suitable for amateur climbers, let alone children. Yeah, that's why this whole situation is so strange. I just chalked it up to maybe he wasn't there that day and just refused to acknowledge it because he didn't witness it. I wasn't sure, so I tried a police station close to that national park. They also told me the same thing. They claimed they had no reports of a lost child being found in a park. I think I called 4 or 5 different stations and got the same response from all of them. How could no one have a record of this child? My last attempt was for some kind of CPS for that county, and they once again took my info and said they would look into it and call me back, but I never heard back. I called back a week later, and that lady was very aggressive, telling me that they couldn't provide any information on any cases to people that were not authorized or not in the family. And then she told me never to call again. I understood not being able to tell me about the child specifically, but I was more so concerned about her well-being and to get an update on the situation. Did she get lost? Was she abandoned? What on earth happened to her? What did she go through? There was no way that not a single person there that day didn't remember what happened. It's not something that happened on a regular basis. So, why was this being so seemingly covered up? That's all I could think. That people were told to stay quiet about this, and then it just adds to my curiosity. Who was that girl, and why did it become such a big secret? A few years ago, I worked for a private security company. My husband worked there for years, and he encouraged me to join him as a security officer for seasonal work. His mother also worked at this company, so it was almost natural for me to hop on as well. I was hired on the spot based on my family's good standing with them, which concerned me. But I can at least say that I was a good fit for them in the end regardless. If you showed up and did your job, which included walking around, maintaining the peace, documenting any safety concerns, staying awake on shift, the boss was happy. Security was not my normal job. I'm a school bus driver, so as a 31-year-old adult, I follow a student schedule, which is awesome. That means that I get weekends, paid holiday breaks, and summer vacation. My occupation keeps stress levels to a minimum, and it feels nice to have the option to work or stay home between June and July. So, this year in particular, just after the 4th of July, a head supervisor encouraged me to take on the role of security dispatch. The previous summer, I spent guarding a seasonal spot, a gated marina. I'm not entirely sure why they felt so confident in my ability. Was it how I carried myself, my attention to detail, or how I once worked alongside park rangers when a storm caused a boat to drift away? This was somewhat of a big deal given this was a major role. As dispatch, I would be responsible for deploying officers, answering phone calls, monitoring CCTVs from an apartment complex that we were contracted with, and most importantly, responding to emergencies, including cooperating with police. I was also expected to document everything in a nightly log. Competency and the ability to work under stress was a must. This was certainly not like the previous year overlooking a beautiful lake, checking IDs and making sure drunk patrons didn't fall into the water. I can happily report, with only 3 nerve-wracking nights training under someone, I did my job as dispatch well. I was finally showing customer service and computer skills at a job that didn't require a college degree. There were times where I needed to help a supervisor by calling the police for an emergency. I'm fairly sure I was involved in helping save a woman from getting attacked in a park at 3 a.m. But that wasn't the night that utterly shook me. We had a new hire at the same marina that I worked the previous year. Let's call him Ben. As dispatch, one of my other duties was to call in and check on every officer at every location once an hour. Normally this involved radios, but the man at the marina didn't have one. Instead, I had to call him. He seemed nice, and with it, he was already doing great as so many new hires quit after day 1, so he had that going for him. During one routine hourly check, I told him my personal experience at the marina. I told him how beautiful the sunrises were, not to mention how spiders and raccoons dominated that place, so carrying a broom was a must. He laughed and agreed with me, thanking me for the advice using a broom, and we hung up. And about half an hour later, around 1:30 a.m., Ben called me sounding panicked, and was unsure of how to tell me what had just happened. He seemed nervous that I was going to laugh and not believe what he was going to say. After a few gentle words of encouragement, he finally got it out. I saw a woman in the water between the boat and the dock. She's wearing all white, and her head was underwater, and she reached out to me, but I couldn't help. I was fully awake by that point, and tried pressing him for more details. Ben explained to me how she didn't say anything or make a sound, but that it seemed like she was drowning. One misconception about drowning is that someone is crying out for help, but it can be quiet and subtle. That's why lifeguards keep their eyes on everyone in the pool, not just keep an ear out. I'm talking about the sound water makes when someone's splashing in it, with their hands all over the place. By the time he knelt down to take her hand, she was already gone in the dark water below, never to be seen again. On the phone, he sounded confused and shocked, and so was I. It was possible for drunk girls falling off their boats and into the water there, but Ben didn't report anything about hearing a scream or splash of any kind. He was very upset by what he saw, but he seemed to calm down when I didn't dismiss his claim. I called the park rangers, and I believe he called the police. It was all we could do. And I reported it in my logs and emailed my supervisor about it so they could investigate further. A few hours passed, and Ben called me again. I asked him some follow-up questions, and he stated the police came, but there were no reports about anyone going missing. One of Ben's jobs at the marina was to make sure patrons signed their name, signifying they were there after hours, but nobody had come around that night. It was like this woman he saw didn't exist. The strangest part was when Ben told me, after the police left, he claimed he saw a woman in white standing above the lake water, and that she stood there for a long while before sinking back down into the water and vanishing again without a trace. I wasn't sure what to tell him when he shared his experience with me, other than telling him to stay safe, and that he was going to be okay. He told me he was scared, and I honestly probably would have been too. He also quit shortly after this, so there's that. When I shared his story with my husband, he told me Ben was likely on some sort of substance, but given how I've had my own personal encounters with the paranormal, I can't dismiss Ben's story that fast. That was also my last year working security, but that was for entirely other reasons. They went belly up. Thanks for reading my story, Raven, and happy, almost, holidays. Hi. So, as the title says, I'm 21. I'm not sure if gender matters, but I'm female. Now, this might sound maybe a tad bit overdramatic since it's been years since this incident has happened that caused this fear, but I just want to get it off my chest as someone who doesn't really talk about it. I personally find this encounter super creepy, especially getting older and being able to look back on it. I've learned a lot from it, so maybe posting what happened could either guide others to stay alert that it could happen to them, or know the signs. I live in rural Ohio, so there's not much going on here. We don't live in the best area either, with lots of druggies and predators. Just if you have kids, you really shouldn't live around here, basically. When I was younger, we didn't really worry much about anything happening to us, or questionable things, due to the fact that our family is known in this area. My grandpa was a known cop for many years and was extremely respected, and people knew he would fight over us. So nobody really messed with us. We also lived around multiple other children our age. It wasn't uncommon to let your kids run around by themselves before nighttime, because our neighborhood essentially relied on each other and the other kids to keep each other safe. And it worked for the most part. We knew what people to stay away from, and they knew to stay away from us as well. When I was in middle school, the bus ran at 7 a.m., and we would have to be at the end of our long driveway by 7 a.m. to catch the bus on time. And this happened during winter, and our bus tended to be late sometimes, and would then reach us around 7:05 to 7:15 at the latest. But we made sure to be out at 7 a.m. in case they were there on time. It was me and my two cousins. One was 4 years older than me, and the other was a year older, but we were in the same grade. The road is straight where our driveway is, so cars come by multiple times, and you would be able to see if a car was slowing down and such, and they would see us as well. We were always told not to stand by the end of the driveway, and to always keep a distance. So if a drunk driver, or whatever, happened to swerve, we would be okay for the most part. We were at the age where me and my cousin, who was in the same grade as me, essentially babysat the younger cousin, and we didn't have an adult accompany us at the end of the driveway anymore. It was super cold that day, and the sun was just coming up, and we were annoyed because the bus was late while waiting in the cold. I noticed a car was coming, and again, this happened all the time, so it wasn't like I was checking it out or anything. I just noticed it and went back to listening to music on my phone. I hear a loud brake sound as I look up, and the car in front of our driveway is now fully stopped. The man in his car was waving his hand towards us to signal us to come closer to him, and, of course, I refused, and was frozen in my spot, because this never happened before. He could tell that we were obviously shaken back by this, and said that he worked for a school, but that he was lost and he had just gotten hired. He named a school that was an hour away. Mind you, it's past 7 a.m. at this point, and I immediately knew he was lying. It didn't make sense to me why he would be lost at a job he said he already got. Plus, it being this late, I would think he would already be at the school. No way would he be lost to the point that he's an hour away from the district and signaling children to his car the way he did, if he was a teacher at all. It also made no sense to me logically how he would be lost from a job he obviously had to go in to get hired for. This was before Zoom and all those things, I'm pretty sure. I immediately said that I'm going to get an adult, and he clearly panicked and said it wasn't necessary, that he just wanted us to get closer and show him where to go. I pointed straight. I truly don't know the direction to the district, but that was not my main focus, honestly. I told him to go straight, and he ignored me. My little cousin was moving towards his car, and I grabbed him by his hair and kept him with me. I refused to let go of his head. I'm shaking and trying to not show that I'm scared because I don't know what's about to happen. The driveway is a long one as well. Like, I truly didn't feel safe turning my back on him. I have my other hand on my phone and I'm shaking, so I'm struggling with gloves on, but I'm able to call my mom and thank God she answers. She usually would ignore my calls and be on the phone with her boyfriend. The guy gets out of his car when he sees that I'm on the phone with someone, and I start immediately sobbing and telling my mom that there's a man out here and that I think he's going to hurt us. She comes out running, and the second she gets closer and he sees her, he bolts back to his car and drives away. A car that was around the corner of the road also dashed away as well. Now looking back, it's even more scary since if it was just someone who needed to get past said car that was in the middle of the road by our driveway, they would have either honked or gone in the other lane to pass them. They definitely also saw the entire thing and didn't get out of their car to help us or anything. So it makes me think they were also in on this entire situation. I'm forced to go to school that day, and my mom calls the cops, and when I get home I find out even more horrible news that just made me realize my gut feeling was correct. My mom told them the car and how it looked and such, and they found an abandoned car that matched her description just up the road. They found who it belonged to, and eventually found out that he wasn't a school teacher. He worked on the barges. The cops said they thought it dealt with trafficking from the looks of it, and they didn't even catch him since they already left on the boat, or whatever. Who knows what would have happened if he got one of us? I'm assuming that we would have been on that boat, and horrible things would have happened. It still pisses me off that he was never caught, and possibly other kids were victims of his. It's truly terrifying, and to this day, I refuse to go near that road. I still have recurring nightmares of it. I'm always on alert now too, which I most definitely should have been more alert back then, but I was just a kid, and clearly didn't realize how it would have affected me in real time. When I was 14, 15, I used to have absolutely no stranger danger awareness at all. I didn't mind being out at night on my own, not that I was much at that age, but I'd go down the back streets on my own. Any basic safety techniques just didn't bother me because I thought I would always be fine. One day I was walking back from town and thought that I would take my usual shortcut down the alleyways, behind the high street. I'm quite happily walking when I round the corner into a guy who's loitering, and we lock eyes straight away. I thought the polite thing to do was to smile, and thankfully he smiled back. I decide that he's no threat, and I walk right by him. Then I hear him say something about my smile. I shout thanks over my shoulder and carry on. I turn down another corner, so does he, now saying that he likes my trainers. So I yell another thanks, and he asks me where I got them from. I say that I don't know. Now I'm speeding up because this dude's definitely following me. I turn down onto the main road where I know there will be people, hoping this will deter him. No, and there he is, following behind, and still trying to get me to engage. I come to a busy crossing and I know that he's about to catch up to me. As safely as I could, which probably wasn't that safe, I bolt across the road, leaving him waiting on the other side and still shouting something at me. I ran across another road, and I dived into a convenience store and called the person who was looking after me at the time, who told me to stay there, and that she was going to come get me. While I'm on the phone with her, I see the man round the corner looking around. He's even checking between cars and everything. Thankfully, he gave up pretty quickly and seemed to leave. My care worker called the police, and 2 officers came, but they weren't overly concerned. I guess he hadn't technically done anything. Interestingly, they did seem to know from the description who it was likely to be, and said that they were in touch with the people who work with him and will feed it back. Anyway, about 4 days later, I go to a coffee place that I used to read in not far from there. It didn't even cross my mind that I might see him again. In my head, it was all sorted, done, dusted. I took a seat near the toilets and started reading when the toilet door opens, and the big blue coat that I had described to the police a few days earlier emerges. I stare at him in fear. He briefly regards me and then carries on past. I have no idea if he recognized me or not. It didn't seem like it. It's safe to say, I am a lot more careful now. To start off, I look physically female. So, this happened about a month ago while I was working in London. I had gone out on a date with a guy and decided to wear these heels. I had to test and see how good they would be for walking around the city. To no one's surprise, they were not comfortable at all. So, by the time I get back to the station closest to where I was staying, my feet hurt like hell. So I was walking, kind of slowly since there were blisters for days. As I'm leaving the station, I'm on the phone with my mom when this guy walks up to me and asks if I had been drinking. I had not been, but I suppose it looked like I could have been since my steps were a bit unsteady due to the uncomfortable dang shoes. So, generic-looking frat bro wannabe asks me if I'm okay. I tell him I'm sober, and that my shoes are just uncomfortable. Now I think that's that and head towards the stairs that go down into my neighborhood. But as I'm walking, Captain Crap decides to try and talk to me once more. And I tell him that I'm on the phone and to go away, that I don't need help. Does he listen? Of course not. Now, something to know about me. I'm pushing 6 feet tall, and with the heels on, I was definitely over 6 foot. So, I am by no means a small person. So when I reach the base of the stairs, the idiot, of course, has walked down ahead of me. What does he do when I reach the base of the stairs? He shows me a video of a woman performing fellatio, and tries to hint that I should do that for him. But here is where this absolute dumbass made a mistake. I have dealt with far worse than some jackass on the street, and do have extensive combat experience. So my immediate response to this was to ask him if he had a death wish while giving him my best death stare. And I have a very good one. I then told him to F off, now, and pointed towards the stairs to tell him to go back to the station. The guy was absolutely dumbfounded, but did indeed F right back off to the train station. So, at least he had a good sense to leave me alone after that. And, keep in mind, this all happened while I was on the phone with my mom. It is absolutely astounding to me, the audacity of absolute F-wits like this. But, needless to say, the jackass will probably think twice about harassing random women near the train station now. It doesn't happen often, but I do take joy when I get to teach these creep shows a lesson, not to think so casually about harassing women. Stay safe, ladies, and remember, don't be polite to these creeps. Be loud, make a scene, act like an absolute crazy person. These a-holes are just looking for people who will be meek and quiet. Be bold, and know that you have just as much right to space as everyone else. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. As the Halloween season approaches, be the eldritch horrors and spooky specters you were meant to be. This story comes with a trigger warning for a pedo/predator type person. So, if that's something you'd want to skip, I recommend skipping this story. When I was a kid, my two younger siblings and I stayed the weekend at our grandmother's house while our parents were out of town. My grandma's long-term boyfriend, let's call him Banks, had moved in with her and would be staying the weekend with us as well. The moment I met him, he immediately gave me the creeps. I don't remember much from our first night there, so I assume nothing out of the ordinary happened. That quickly changed the following morning. My grandma announced that she would be leaving us at home with Banks for a bit so she could pick up groceries. As Grandma left, my brother, sister, and I sat in the living room couch watching TV. Shortly thereafter, I heard Banks emerge from his bedroom down the hall. I listened closely to Banks's footsteps as he approached, and I noticed he was more so slowly creeping down the hallway as opposed to walking. I fixated on the doorway where he would inevitably appear, and when he did, he was crouched down, eyes wide and grinning with his hands positioned as if he was about to pounce toward us. He began running toward us on the couch, yelling, "I'm the tickle monster," and then pounced on top of my younger sister, aggressively tickling her while kneeling over her on the couch. Banks is over 6 feet tall, muscular build, and my sister is below the age of 10. My sister repeatedly asked Banks to stop, exclaiming, "I don't like it, stop that." My sister let out a high-pitched scream and began to hysterically cry. At this point, I intervened. It sounded like Banks was hurting her, and I didn't like that he was continuing to tickle her while she screamed and cried. I tried inserting myself between my sister and Banks and told him to stop. He wouldn't remove his hands from my sister. I began slapping Banks's arm, telling him to let her go, and once he released his grip, I screamed, "Run," to my brother and sister. The only thing I remember feeling and thinking in this moment was to get the hell away from this man right now. I ran out of the living room down the hallway and into the first bedroom. My sister followed behind me, and then my brother. And as I was closing the bedroom door, Banks caught up to us and shoved himself against the door to prevent me from locking it shut. Miraculously, I was able to lock it before he overpowered me. Once my siblings and I were locked in the bedroom, Banks continued to bang on the door while he repeatedly yelled, "I'm the tickle monster, let me in! The tickle monster's coming to get you!" Both of my siblings are hysterically crying at this point. I'm now overcome with fear of what Banks will do if he manages to gain access to the bedroom. Although I didn't have a phone, I yelled back at him, "If you don't stop, I'm gonna call the police." Banks backed off, and I heard him retreat back to his bedroom down the hall and close the door. My siblings and I stayed in the bedroom with the door locked until my grandma returned. Banks remained in his bedroom for the rest of the night. The following morning, Banks left the house, and my grandma said he'd been gone for the day working. That afternoon, my grandma fell asleep on the living room couch, and for whatever reason, I decided to go in their bedroom to snoop around. I went into what appeared to be Banks's nightstand, and I found his personal journal. For the most part, it was filled with nonsense and very detailed drawn depictions of sex. Some of the drawings had a bit of a satanic undertone, but at the time I was too young to recognize and understand what I was looking at. I began quickly flipping through it, and landed on a page with big, bold black and red capital letters, which read, "If you die a virgin, do you go to hell?" Below it was a drawing of a prepubescent nude girl. There were two versions of the girl standing side by side. One where she appears happy and smiley, and the other her face is more distorted and confused. Typing this out and re-envisioning it, it makes me feel disgusting. I don't know how to emphasize how disturbing this was. I instantly went numb and dropped the journal, ran to the living room and demanded my grandma call my parents so I could go home immediately. My sister was ultimately covered in bruises from Banks, quote, tickling her. Strange and creepy dude. Before I start, I'm sorry about any typos. I'm using my phone to write this. Hey, I'm an Indigenous Australian from the Dingeti people, and I have some stories about a ghost called Charlie. There is a jail called Trial Bay Jail in the Arakoon National Park in New South Wales. It has a lot of significance to my people, and we still do things there. I live in Victoria because of university studies, but every holiday, I travel up and spend time with the family. Charlie is a ghost who was a German prisoner back in the 1900s. This was when the jail was still open. People of German descent were placed here during World War I. Not a lot of people knew that we had these kind of camps in Australia, but we did. So, about Charlie. I don't think anyone knows how he died or how he got there. There are several spirits who roam around, and I can't say that I've seen any of those, but I think I had an encounter with old Charlie. I was out playing with some of my cousins, and I was dared by one of them, Gaz, to climb one of the trees. We spent a lot of time outdoors, playing in the bush and learning about our heritage. Anyway, so I did. When I started climbing a tree, I got several meters up off the ground, and suddenly I was thrown off, falling down with Gaza and others laughing at me before helping me up. I told them that I had a good grip, but that it felt like something had pushed me. I was dazed and confused, but wasn't physically hurt. Gaza told me that old Charlie doesn't like me climbing his tree. I don't know if he just liked the tree or maybe he was hung from it. I asked who Charlie was, and he told me that it was a ghost. I asked some of my family and elders about him. They used to live inside the ruins during the 60s and 70s. They would tell me to keep an eye out for this Charlie fella. He hasn't directly threatened anyone other than what I'll say below. This part isn't my story, but one of my aunties who was camping late at night. Her and her friends were getting ready for bed when Charlie dragged her out of the tent. I even heard that someone heard their toddler screaming and found them outside. I don't know that person personally, and he's also known for tugging on people's clothing to get their attention, and women in the family were known to pin their clothes just in case. I don't think he's done anything creepy to anyone, but it is unsettling. He hasn't gone out of his way to hurt anyone, but he is a dick, and will roam the grounds. I haven't seen him, but I've felt him a couple of times. I'm not a spiritual person, so I don't think I can see ghosts, but I know people who claim to have seen him. I've been on some of the tours through Arakoon National Park, and if you want, you can come and see for yourself. I recommend seeing the ruins of the old jail, too. Some parts of it are pretty hard, so make sure you're fit, otherwise you're not going to have fun. I'm going back up there to visit family soon, so I'll let you know if I see or hear any more stories about it. Also, thanks for taking the time to narrate stories that are set in Australia. Not a lot of horror narrators do so good on you, mate. If you're ever out this way, I'd be happy to show you around. My girlfriend used to work for a coffee shop that wasn't a big corporate one. It was locally owned, and the old lady that owned it was the nicest person ever. Since my girlfriend worked there, the owner told me that I could come in any time, and that it would be okay if I got up to a medium latte. No larges, though. She said I had to pay for a large one. I was in my early 20s and was a coffee addict already, so I loved this idea. Of course, since it was a small coffee shop, and I knew that she wasn't super wealthy or making tons of profit on it, I would usually order a large and just pay for it. Unless it was a rough week financially, and then I would just get a small. Either way, I would sit in the lobby on my laptop doing various things for school, myself, or whatever. I often found myself working on freelance projects at night, so I would sit up there on my girlfriend's closing shift, and we would ride home together when she got off. It was kind of nice, and I do miss it, but that's not relevant to the story. There was one night when I was sitting up there finishing up a project near the back. I usually sat away from the busy area so I didn't take up too much space. The shop closed at midnight, and they actually did get a good number of people late at night. Mostly because they were the only cafe open that late in town. But I remember on that night, it was actually pretty dead. There were the occasional customers, just people coming in for their late night pick-me-up, or a muffin or whatever. But other than that, it was just myself, the two baristas behind the bar, and the coffee shop playlist playing on a free Pandora radio account, connected to a speaker system. At around 11:30ish, the front doorbell chimed, and I glanced up out of habit. There was a woman walking through the door wearing a long dark coat that was buttoned all the way up to her neck. Her hair was a very, very bleach white. I don't mean blonde, I mean it was white. But she didn't look like she was old enough to have white hair, if that makes sense. She looked like she was in her late 20s. She walked up to the counter, and the other barista, the one that wasn't my girlfriend, Ronnie, greeted her with his typical, "Hello, what can we get for you?" The woman didn't respond right away. She just sort of stared at the menu. This wasn't too uncommon. Some people can be really indecisive. She stared up at the board for several moments and then slowly shifted her head down to the pastry case. I could see the confusion on Ronnie's face, a bit of impatience as well. After several more seconds, Ronnie asked, "Do you have any questions?" She glanced up at him for a split second, like she was acknowledging what he said, but then immediately went back to looking at the case. She was tilting her head and analyzing everything, like she couldn't quite understand what she was looking at. My immediate thought was, this woman is tripping hard right now. But she seemed calm enough, so I really wasn't concerned. Ronnie, on the other hand, was looking kind of anxious about the whole thing, but she wasn't really acknowledging him, so there wasn't much he could do. After several minutes of her scanning the bakery treats, she finally made eye contact with Ronnie and said, "Do you have anything else?" Ronnie kind of stuttered to answer her question, saying, I mean, we have all these pastries, and we have all the coffee listed up on the board, but we do have a few other things, like breakfast sandwiches. They just take a bit longer if you don't mind waiting." And she then shifted her focus to Ronnie directly for several seconds, just standing there and staring at him. I could tell that he was getting freaked out. She then opened her mouth and said, "Okay, I'll come back when it's ready," then turned and walked out of the shop without actually ordering anything. Ronnie watched her walk out without saying anything, and then looked at me like, what the hell was that? I couldn't help but laugh a bit, and he asked, "Did she actually say what she wanted and I just missed it? Or did she just walk out without ordering anything?" I just laughed and said, "Yeah, that happened. I didn't hear her order anything." Ronnie chuckled and said okay, and then went back to cleaning the counter and the machines. It stayed quiet like that for about 25 or so more minutes, and then the doorbell went off again at 11:58, right before they closed. I looked back up to see who it was, again, just a force of habit with my ADHD issues, and lo and behold, it was the same woman. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her were two very large men, both of them looking very mean. Not to be a judgmental a-hole, but they looked very aggressive. Worse yet, I could see that they were both armed. Both of them had a firearm in their hands, and my first thought was, I'm about to die. Ronnie must have noticed this too, because I heard him give a bit of a yelp in the middle of his greeting. We both just sat there and stared at what was happening in front of us. The two men stood stone still at the front door, and the weird woman walked up to the counter and once again started studying the pastry case. Ronnie didn't step forward this time. I think he was thinking that we were about to die as well. That those guys were about to rob the place, and since they weren't covering their faces, they likely weren't going to leave any witnesses. But neither man moved. They just stood there blocking the door, and the woman was doing her thing. A couple of seconds pass, and then Ronnie asks, "I'm sorry, can I help you with anything?" I watched then as the woman stood straight up and looked him dead in the face. She leaned over the counter and got super close to his face. Like she could have bumped forward a bit and kissed him. And that's how close she was. And then she just smiled and said, "Chocolate muffin." Ronnie almost didn't register what she was asking for. But when it clicked, he fumbled with the tongs and got one out of the case and put it in a to-go bag, and then placed that on the counter. The woman grabbed the bag, put it to her face, and just took a big whiff in, like she was absorbing the smell of the muffin. She then tossed the muffin back on the counter and walked toward the men at the door, and the three of them just exited like it was the most normal interaction to ever happen at the coffee shop. Ronnie stood there confused. I sat there watching the door like, what the hell? And eventually my girlfriend came out from the back to ask if everything was okay. Ronnie broke down and started telling her about the woman and what all had happened. She didn't get to see it since she was in the back the whole time doing closings, so she was none the wiser. Ronnie grabbed the muffin from the counter and asked me if I wanted it. I laughed and told him no, and he tossed it, and then immediately locked the front door, saying that he didn't want her coming back. They went and finished up the closing duties, and that was pretty much the end of the night. Neither myself nor Ronnie had any idea what that was, who that lady was, why she was so wonky, and why she just wanted to sniff the muffin. But that's what happened. Definitely a bizarre situation to be in, and I was a bit terrified when the dudes walked in, but other than that, it's a damn fun story to bring up randomly when I'm hanging out with Ronnie. I'm a 29-year-old man from the Philippines. And even though this incident occurred back in 2013, over a decade ago, I still find myself haunted by it every time I return to my hometown. At the time, I was just an 18-year-old college student. It was the night of our department's socialization party, which had wrapped up around midnight. As the only one among my friends with a car, I had always taken on the role of the designated driver. After dropping my friends off at their homes, I was parking in my usual spot, just a few houses away from my own, due to the limited parking in our area. As I was about to exit the car, I noticed a girl standing near the entrance of the alleyway leading to my house, and several others, wearing a shirt with our department's logo. I assumed that she had just walked back from the party. In front of her, a man in his late 20s, clad in a hoodie, stood ominously, seemingly blocking her path. The girl locked eyes with me, and I immediately recognized her expression. It was a silent plea for help. Instinct kicked in. I grabbed my bag and stepped out of the car. The man, noticing my presence, began to walk into the alleyway. When I reached the girl, he had vanished from sight. It felt as though whatever threatening situation had occurred moments before was over, and I was tempted to walk away. But then I caught sight of the strange man again. He was leaning against the wall of a nearby house, his gaze fixed on me. A chill ran down my spine, and just then, the girl called out from behind me. Her voice trembled with fear, and I saw her approach, visibly shaken. "Can you walk with me to my apartment at the end of the alleyway?" she asked, explaining that the man had been silently blocking her way. I glanced back at the man. He appeared intoxicated, perhaps drunk or on drugs. We began to walk. Our breaths were shallow as we passed him. After putting some distance between us, I glanced back, and to my horror, he was following us. We had already passed my house at that point, but I couldn't leave this girl to face him alone. As fear coursed through me, she suddenly broke into a full sprint, and I had no choice but to keep pace with her. We reached the gate to her apartment, and she hastily swung it open, slamming it shut behind us. We then dashed into the building where a second gate stood, this one smaller, likely designed to keep pets from escaping. She opened it, and we slipped through just as the sound of the man approaching the first gate reached our ears. We bolted up the stairs, making our way to the third floor. Breathless, the girl knocked urgently but softly at her apartment door. After what felt like an eternity, it swung open, revealing her friends, a guy and a girl around her age. They looked bewildered but quickly locked the door behind us and led us into the bedroom. They turned off the lights, and we just sat there silently with our hearts pounding. The girl broke down in tears, recounting the terrifying events to her friends. She revealed that the man had been following her for 10 to 15 minutes, and she expressed relief at having seen me. Unsure of what to do next, I called my aunt who was staying at our house that night. Thankfully, she answered swiftly. I urged her to call the police. At this time, we could now hear the man pacing around the apartments, seemingly looking for us. He was mumbling something that we couldn't hear well from the other side of the door. A few minutes later, my phone rang with an unknown number. It was my uncle, a policeman, reassuring me that help was on the way. What felt like hours dragged on, and eventually the police arrived. My uncle instructed me via phone to come downstairs and recount the ordeal to the officers. They informed us that they had seen the man wandering around the gate and eventually into the far end of the alleyway. Once the police had finished their inquiries, they allowed me to go home. I recounted the entire story to my aunt, who urged me to get some rest. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me as my mind raced with thoughts of the strange man. What if he caught up with us, armed with a knife or some kind of weapon? I fought to dispel the terrifying images racing through my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he might be watching me in the dark, a knife glinting menacingly in his hand. When I was 16, I was walking to a store near my house. I was a huge pothead and would walk to the neighborhood nearby to get my stuff and then take a shortcut through said neighborhood to the store to get wraps. I was walking through the abandoned apartment building, and a very nice dressed man was walking through and asked how I was doing. I ignored him and kept walking. In the area that I was walking, there's not really white men in suits, so I was thrown off. I get to the store and I'm walking back, and a white truck is parked in the corner of the apartment building. So I opted to go the long way on the busy street. The truck drove up to me and the same man jumped out and picked me up so fast that I didn't even have time to think. I was only 100 pounds at the time, and wasn't nearly as strong as him. I tried to scream and hit him with my elbow, but no luck. A lady that's heavily on drugs that's always walking around my city came running at us and yelling to put me down. He actually put me down and sped off. Almost 10 years later, I always stopped to give the woman food and actually just paid for her to get rehab, so she's doing great now. Reunited with her grandchildren and working. Not as creepy as the other stories on here, but definitely never walked alone again after that. I want to start this by saying that I have been camping and hiking since I was a child. It was something that I really bonded over with my father. With that said, I'm very familiar with wildlife. Bears, moose, bucks, and even a wolverine once. I would not recommend startling them. I can identify most animals by their sounds and tracks, but what I saw a few years ago in this national park up north still makes the hair stand up. And part of the reason is because I couldn't identify it. Once a year, I planned a solo trip for myself as a way to get back to nature and forget about anything else around me. It truly was one of the most relaxing times, and I always looked forward to it. And this was one of those trips. It was late August, so the nights were getting cooler, and I had planned for that. I packed my sleeping bag, thin layers so I could wear multiple pieces at night, and the other minimal items that I needed. I packed light. I knew that I also didn't get service in the mountains and trees, so I left my phone in the center console of my car. I also know that where I was staying was known for bear sightings, not to mention all the warning signs they had everywhere, so I also did everything by the books to avoid encounters. I had a bear bag properly hung, kept my camp cleaned up, no food out in the open, and I even picked a spot that was pretty well open with good visibility. Most of the trip was fine, up until that night I got ready for bed. The first sign something was wrong came around 2 or 3 a.m. I'd finally dozed off while I was reading, but I woke to the sound of growling. At first, I wasn't startled by this. It wasn't unusual to hear animals out there, especially at night. I recognized one voice immediately, the distinctive sound of a mountain lion. That throaty snarl that sounded like it was coming from something much bigger than it actually is. But the other sound was what piqued my curiosity. I didn't recognize it. It was almost like someone trying to imitate a growl, but it was wrong. It was like if you asked an AI to generate the sound of an animal that doesn't exist. It had this almost weird modulation to it, shifting pitches that shouldn't go together. Sometimes it sounded human, then it would drop really low, so low that my tent seemed to vibrate. But being who I am, I wanted to investigate it. I needed to know what was making these foreign sounds. So, against every horror movie rule and survival instinct, I had to look. I didn't grab my headlamp or any other light, not wanting to draw attention to myself or spook the creature. I hoped the moon and reflection from the nearby stream would provide enough light. I got out of my tent and looked around and spotted some movement on the other side of the stream. I walked closer to the stream where I was able to make out that mountain lion, confirming what I had heard. It looked to be a decent-sized one, too. Definitely an adult. It was in a full defensive posture, back arched, tail rigid, and ears flat. It was circling something, the way they do when they're sizing up or threatening something else. And that's when I tried to focus on what it was up against. The other creature was on all fours, at first. In the moonlights, I initially thought that it was a bear, but the proportions were all wrong. Its limbs were too long and thin. The joints bent at unnatural angles. Its head was massive compared to its body, but not in any way that made sense. How and why was its head so big? It also didn't seem to have a snout like a bear. It was flatter, like a human or maybe a cat. I seemed to zone everything out around me and was just focused on trying to figure out what this thing was. Then it stood up, throwing everything I thought and knew out the window. The only way I could describe it, it just unfolded, like someone doing origami in reverse. On two legs, it had to be almost 9 feet tall. Its arms hung down past its knees. The mountain lion, this common and huge predator that people feared, now just looked like a large house cat in comparison. But even with how large and unnatural the creature was, its movement was fluid and fast. I watched as it reached out and grabbed the lion's tail. The cat screamed, and that's what made me lose it. Right then, I knew that cat was going to die if something didn't happen. I acted before anything and let out the loudest roar that I could muster. I know I probably sounded stupid, but I had to try something. Surprisingly, it worked. The creature's head snapped toward me so fast that it looked like it would have broken its neck. Even through the darkness, I caught a glimpse of its eyes. They reflected like an animal's, but they were set in front of the face like a human's. At that moment, I felt sick, and this sense of dread engulfed me. I thought I was dead, for sure. It made that wrong, growling sound again, but this time, I'm not exaggerating here, it sounded distorted, like it was coming through some kind of cheap speaker. It dropped the mountain lion, which immediately bolted in the opposite direction through the trees. The creature stared at me for what felt like hours, but was probably just a few seconds. I was scared out of my mind, but I was also frozen in place. What was I supposed to do there anyways? Then, the creature dropped back on all fours and slowly walked deeper into the trees behind where it stood, all in that same unsettling fluidity. I spent the rest of the night not sleeping. I wasn't comfortable with sleeping or staying in a tent where I couldn't see every position around me. I ended up starting my fire again and just sat there, waiting for the first sign of daylight. As soon as it showed up, I packed up and hiked out of there in record time for myself. I've tried researching what it was that I saw, but no dice. I've gone down every cryptozoology rabbit hole that I could find. I asked my dad and even a friend of the family that had been a park ranger for nearly 2 decades. Nothing was matching. The closest thing I've found was some obscure legend about walkers, but I'm not even sure it fully fits those. Its long front legs or arms and its unnaturally large head was what threw me off. I still have no answers, and to be honest, I'm too afraid to go back. I've gone hiking in that same park before, but I can't bring myself to stay there overnight. The mountain lion was obviously afraid of that thing, and that should tell you everything you need to know about it. I would rather never have an encounter with that thing ever again. The other day, I went to the clinic and parked in the parking lot dedicated for the building. It was the afternoon, but still bright outside. There's always sketchy people and homeless people around the city, but I don't generally encounter dangerous things in this area. I walked to my car and sat in it for a bit, calling my boyfriend with an update. The car was parked right beside a sidewalk. When I saw someone come up the driver's side area, I really didn't think anything too sketchy of it. But when I turned my head, I noticed a lady peering into my car as she slowly walked by. She stopped a short distance from my car on the sidewalk and just stood there. There's no bus stop there, no reason I can think of to wait there either. Just on the sidewalk in front of my car. She was carrying a large backpack, another bag, and looked like she was listening to music. I noticed this lady glance at me a few times while I was on my phone. I didn't think too much of it at the time. She then came walking back to my car slowly and looking in my car. This time she went behind my car and stood there with her back towards the car. She was pretty much standing in the middle of the parking lot. I peered in my rearview mirror and she was swaying back and forth and had big headphones on. I noted to my boyfriend the suspicious behavior. She glanced backwards into my rearview window approximately 3 times. At this point, I figured this person was up to no good, and was worried that she was looking for an opportunity to rob me. When vehicles drove past her in the parking lot, she wouldn't even move for them. My boyfriend advised me to start the car and start backing up to see what she would do. The second I started the car, she turned around to look at me and then went back to the sidewalk and took off down the street. I don't know if this person was waiting for me to get out of the car to rob me, or was waiting for an opportunity to try and steal my car, but the whole thing has made me feel super unsettled all day. So, I'm new to this city for a concert that I'm gonna go see. It's my first time traveling alone, so I feel like the safest spot for me is to just relax and read some manga in the city library while I wait for my hotel check-in time to come. Well, I guess I picked a bad spot to read at, because people kept trying to talk to me, which is fine, but I'm too shy to just tell them to go away. One person sat at a table across from me and asked me where I'm from and who I came with. Obviously, I lied, even though I assumed this person was an older lady. They were wearing a hat and thick coat, so I really couldn't tell. I was nicer to them than I should have been, since I assumed this older lady was the chatty type, you know. She said that I looked young and have nice hair and stuff, and then asked if I'm from around here and where my parents are. I'm an adult. Well, turns out, they're not a lady. As I got a closer look at them, as he came closer and he comes to sit next to me, he then asked me for my number, and stupidly I did give my actual number. He wrote his down and his name and asked me to write my name too. I put a fake name. Then he gives me his phone to put in the info and compares the written to the one I put in his phone. Real number and fake name. I can't bring myself to refuse since none of the librarians were looking our way, and he was rather big, so I didn't want to make him mad or something. Then he turns to leave and asks when he can call me, and I'm like, oh, just whenever. Obviously, I blocked him when he tried to call later, so I hope he assumes my number was fake too. But as he left, he asked if I had a Facebook, and I said no. And then he asked if he could take a photo of me. He's like, can I take some pictures of you if you don't have a Facebook? And I nervously laughed and said, no. Honestly, what? Anyway, I don't think I'll visit a big city library again. I'll go to Barnes & Noble next time or something. Okay, how do I even start with this one? Well, it happened probably back in 2013. True to form, I was already running a little late to work. I was a manager at a local restaurant here in town. It was about 4 p.m. and a gorgeous clear day in Florida. So I finally get in my car and start heading down the dirt roads to work. I had gotten about 10 minutes from my house when I had to stop and turn left onto the first major road. As I get to the end of the last dirt road and come up to the paved road, I look across the paved road and see something that appears to be hanging in the sky, over the dirt road that continued on the other side of the paved one. Even though I was already running behind, I had to check it out. It was just too weird. I had lived here since I was a kid, so I knew that shouldn't be there. So, cautiously, I crossed the paved road and drive down the dirt road on the other side. As I get further down, I realize this thing isn't hovering over the dirt road. It was actually next to it, hanging over a cow field. I still, to this day, do not know what possessed me to get out of my car, climb the fence, and walk out to see what it was, but I did. I get past the tree line and turn right, only to come face to face with a silver, metallic spaceship. It was just hovering at tree level about 30 feet away from me. Nothing but clear midday air between me and it. I was instantly frozen in place. This thing was about 40 to 50 feet long, silver, and had no apparent doors or windows, or even rivets. Just smooth metallic glinting in the sun as it sat there bobbing back and forth. Not forward and backwards bobbing, but kind of side to side. I will never forget watching the sun glint off of this thing. I stood there just dumbfounded thinking, what the hell are my eyes looking at right now? I remember thinking, what do I do? I hadn't brought my phone with because until I really got a good look at it, I wasn't sure what it was. I only had a small flip phone at the time, so it probably wouldn't have taken a good picture of it anyways. I remember thinking, should I go get my friend's mom as she lived down that road? I knew it would probably be gone by the time we got back, and she would think I was insane. I stood there for what seemed like forever, trying to figure out what to do. It just sat there silently and never even tried to leave. It was as if it wanted me to see it. Now, even though there were no doors or windows, like I said earlier, I could feel someone staring back at me. It was the strongest feeling I have ever had. It started at my feet and went all the way up my body. This feeling that I needed to get the heck out of there. It was as if someone on that ship was sending me that message. I remember standing there facing the road again and thinking, what do? You get the hell out of here. That is what you do. The next thing I remember clearly is waking up in my car at the end of the dirt road, right in front of the paved road. I remember thinking, where am I? And which way do I go? Now, like I said, I've lived here most of my life, so why would I feel like I needed to ask which way do I go? I remember feeling very confused. I snapped out of it a little and turned right and headed to work. I was so freaked out that it didn't even dawn on me not to tell anyone. I get to work and the outgoing manager is livid. She asks, "Why are you so late?" I just blurt out, "I saw a UFO." She looks at me for a moment and then laughs and says, "Well, there's one I haven't heard before." Then and only then did it hit me that I shouldn't have said that. We both laughed and went about our business. Somehow I managed to manage that place that night. Luckily, I had our best cook, or I probably would have never have gotten out of there. So, for many years after that, I thought that I had only gone a little ways down that dirt road. But recently I went back there and realized that the open field was halfway down that road. Now I question how I could have gotten over that fence, got in the car, turned the car on and turned it around and drove halfway down that road and not remember any of it. I think someone was warning me to get out of there, but I'm pretty sure I didn't get out of there in time. I'm pretty sure I was abducted that day. I don't remember anything like that, but it's the only thing that explains why I don't remember it at all. If I remember all the other parts, why can't I remember that part as well? Many years later, I saw that other manager out in the parking lot, so I went up and asked her if she remembered that happening. I wanted to know how late I was that day. I didn't realize it until later, but I probably freaked her out. It was one thing to say that to get out of being late, but to still be thinking about it years later probably told her that I wasn't, in fact, lying after all. She said she didn't even remember it. I wish that I could forget it so easily. Unfortunately, it's been etched into my memory forever. This is a story that I've been wanting to tell for a long time. It's raining heavily, so I decided to take advantage of that and tell this story. I have to admit that I feel very nervous as I write this. The year is 2020. At that time, I was still going to school, and at the same time, I was working. My sister was about 24 years old at the time. My best friend used to come to my place for the weekend, and I always used it as an escape from work and school, and I loved spending time with him. My sister, although a little more serious and a few years older than us, liked to spend time with us, and she also cooked while we played games, and it became a tradition. One day, a festival was held in our town, so I arranged with that friend to meet in the town. I hang out with my sister all the time, so I took her here and we met together with that friend. And so we visited the parks in the city and looked for a place to relax, but again, it all soon became boring. Near the church, I saw a house that looked kind of poor, but there was a lot of shoes there, as if the house was full. And then the friend told me that a psychic lives there and charges for his service and, quote, heals people. Of course, it immediately occurred to us to check what this was actually about. I wasn't a believer at the time, so even the thought of something like this was funny to me. We entered the house, and as soon as I stepped in, I smelled something wet, if I can call it that. Some people exited the room, and others were waiting for something. The house felt very cold. To the right of the entrance is the room where that man worked, and that's where we met him. In the middle of the room sat a man wearing a white suit. We greeted him, and without a word, he just pointed with his hand where to sit. After that, we had light conversation, nothing significant. After a few moments, he started doing what we came for. My sister was the first in line, and it seemed to me that, at one point, she fell into a trance. And I, the guy who only believes in science, explained it as hypnosis. She started to cry and laugh, and she does it all when he says to. When she came out of the trance, he said that he cast a curse, and that the only way to get rid of it was to be with him in marriage. I immediately said that it was time to go, and that he was a drug addict and a lunatic. For 3 months, or a little more, I planned a trip to another country together with my sister and parents. Light music in the car and driving. As soon as we entered another country, the phone rang at the same moment, and it was him. He immediately asked why we were going to another country, if we were running away from him. We had an argument over the cell phone, and to this day I still don't know how he knew we were in another country, or how he had our number. After that, pictures of my sister with strange padlocks on the pictures started arriving at the address. There were dozens of pictures, and on each of them, there was a real padlock that pierced through the picture and was attached to the picture. We were forced to call the police, but they couldn't do anything. There are still hateful messages from fake profiles, but the harassment has somehow stopped. Excuse my bad English, as I used Google Translate on some parts, but this story is 100% truth, and I feel really uneasy while typing it. As a child, I traveled a lot with my mother to different tourist places in our country and abroad. We celebrated that New Year's Eve in Austria, and I was 12 years old at the time. That day, we were at the Kunsthistorisches Museum, one of the most famous places in Vienna, especially for tourists like us. However, I remember that this rendezvous was very tiring for me. While we were at the very bottom of the museum, my mom said that she wanted to go to the bathroom and asked me if I wanted to go to the store afterwards before leaving. I replied that I didn't, and told her that I would wait for her at the bench in front of the wardrobe until she did her business. She was absent for a few minutes when a very tall man with a creepy smile from one ear to the other and wild, wide-open eyes approached me when I was sitting there. He started talking to me, and I thought he asked me some questions, but he was speaking German, and I didn't understand what he was saying to me. I replied to him that I don't know the language, which infuriated him. He touched my shoulder and changed his voice from affectionate to aggressive. His English was so-so, as was mine, but he tried to convince me that I really do speak German and that I was trying to fool him. At this point, my mom came back and approached the man in surprise. He was clearly frightened, quickly waved at me and fastly walked out of the museum. My mother asked what he wanted, but I didn't know what to say to her, for I understood nothing of his speech, except a complaint that I didn't answer him in German. There was also an elderly couple who were around, watching the encounter. I approached them and asked them what the man was trying to tell me. The woman just replied something that it doesn't really matter, that the man was very strange and that I should really be careful. Who knows what would have happened if my mom hadn't shown up on time. I have been hesitant to share this story outside of close friends and family for a long time. I guess I've now had enough time to process through these events, because I'm finally ready to share with the world. Back in 2009 to 2010, I had just been married and was living in Korea with my new wife and our dog Eugene. For the sake of privacy, I will refer to myself as G and my wife as U. My dog has since passed, and he's an important part of this story. May this account of those events be a tribute to him. Rest in peace, Eugene, the paranormal alarm system, and my furry friend. We lived outside of a large US military installation in a rural backroads area of one of the small local villages of South Korea. The road in and out of where our villa was located was nothing more than a crude concrete and gravel path that wound its way through farms, woods, and rice fields. There were also a few other nearby buildings, and one of them at the top of the hill where the main road crests would sometimes host activities that were probably not of legal persuasion. Late one night, you and I would occasionally see cars or hear people in the vicinity of this building. People would sometimes walk through our villa parking lot late, and my dog Eugene would bark aggressively until the persons had left the area. We usually chalked these rare occasions up to criminal activity, but perpetrated by criminals more interested in illegal gambling than robbing villas. However, one night, things would take a very dark and terrifying turn. As we often did, you and I were up this particular late night, laying in bed playing games on our electronic devices. I think I was rocking a Nintendo 3DS before you decided to accidentally wash it. They're definitely not waterproof. I eventually fell asleep, only to be abruptly shaken awake by my wife. I looked at the clock. I remember it being past midnight and then hearing my dog barking in the bedroom doorway like he was defending us to the death. As I looked down and saw the hairs standing up on the back of my dog's neck, you began speaking rapidly at me in a very concerned voice. "There are people right outside in the parking lot," she said. She pulled me over to the bedroom window and pulled the curtains back ever so slightly. But there was no one outside. The thing is, these people were floating, drifting, and I caught glimpses of their silhouettes as they passed back and forth in front of the windows, she stated emphatically. Most of what she described sounded plausible, except for the drifting part. I have to admit, it was a bit off-putting considering she was very concerned enough to wake me up. We mused over it for a while, but I convinced her that, whatever it was, everything seemed okay now. I was so exhausted, even though it did strike me as odd what she saw, and also how Eugene was freaking out. But I just wanted to get some sleep, as we both had work coming early in the morning. I told her to let me know if anything else happened, but to try and not worry about it. Eugene had finally calmed down at this point, and I slowly started drifting off back into sleep. It seemed like only a split second went by, and I was abruptly shaken awake again. This time, you whispered nervously, "Someone is knocking. Do you hear that?" I noticed Eugene was growling in the doorway again, but he still didn't seem to want to leave the room. Briefly glancing at the clock, it was now 1 a.m. Even though I was highly irritated and somewhat alarmed, I tried to entertain her. I began listening intently for the knock, but I couldn't hear anything. I thought to myself, this is crazy. "Babe," I said, "it's gotta be a tree branch or something." She seemed insulted and snapped back. It was a knocking sound, a pattern. As I looked at her and felt her sincerity, I literally got chills. Eugene was alert, but so far more calm. I decided to try and get back to sleep. I told you to try to do the same, even though she admitted she was a bit weirded out and couldn't fall asleep. But I was beyond tired, and it didn't take long for me to drift off again, only this time to be awakened to my frantic wife pleading with me to listen to the knocking sound. Through the fog of waking up, and through the concern that I had for my wife, who was clearly stressing the F out, I could in fact hear a knocking noise. More of a ting than a thud. There were a few, and then a short pause, and then a few more, then a long pause, then one or two. I felt the chills again as I tried to pinpoint the source of the knocking sound. It was a short pattern and repeated several more times. Right before I could exactly pinpoint where the tings were coming from, it stopped. I went to the back of the villa where the wind would sometimes knock the tree branches against the windows. There was no wind. There was nothing. I then went to the bathroom and listened for the knocking, but there was nothing. Suddenly, you and Eugene began both showing signs of panic. You said she heard the knocking again, and Eugene started growling and pacing about. I thought, this is starting to get weird. Am I still asleep? I mulled things over for a minute or two in my mind, as you demanded that I do something, like figure out what was happening. A tall order in that moment. But then, it was like a switch was thrown. I knew what I had to do. I had searched inside, or so I thought at that time, and it logically followed that I needed to go outside and catch the culprit in the act. I grabbed the bat by the couch and a knife from the kitchen. I didn't even get a shirt or shoes on before I was out the front door, through the vestibule and into the parking lot. I was ready to trade blows with anyone or anything. The only visible light was coming from the few streetlights. I didn't see anyone, but I felt honestly as if someone or something was out there with me. Am I way too tired? Am I losing it? What am I even doing? I started feeling a bit silly as I walked around our villa. There was no one out there, or any sign of what could have caused the knocking. This is all probably in our heads, I thought. When I went back inside, I was met immediately by you, who wanted me to report my findings. "There's literally no one out there," I blurted out. "That knocking was too weird, though, and it was probably something we can readily explain later." I could tell that suggestion wasn't good enough for her by her facial expression. "Gee, you know me," she defended, stating, "I can pick up these sorts of things." I responded that, of course, I knew that, but was hoping not to have to go down that sort of path. You had seen a series of other out-of-the-ordinary occurrences in her life, and little did we know then that we would experience more of these occurrences before we moved out of that place. That's a story or two for another time. Then, it dawned on me. I had forgotten to check the laundry room for the source of the knocking. The villa was elevated above the ground several feet, and there was a fairly large crawl space under the 3-story structure. As we lived on the first floor, looking out of the laundry room's sliding glass windows gave us a view of the ground and trees a few feet below. I had walked past these windows on my outside armed search. I had noticed that the blinds were drawn so I could clearly see up into the laundry room. As I was back inside, I convinced myself to go ahead and check the laundry room, for one, to show my wife that I believed her, and also because I had an almost eerie sense that the knock could have been in one of the laundry room windows. Still on edge, and with my wife and dog huddled curiously behind me, I flung open the laundry room door and flicked on the light switch. I scanned the small cluttered room for anything out of the ordinary. Nothing. So I looked out the windows, but I could only see the glare caused by the laundry room light. I don't see anything, babe. Can we go back to sleep now? I nervously murmured as I flipped off the light and went to shut the door. As I turned to leave this whole strange night in the past, my eyes caught a glimpse outside through the now transparent glass. As sure as the sun rose the next day, the silhouette of a tall figure stood just outside, partially blocking the light from the distant streetlight. I let out a shriek, literally, and then jumped backwards, flinging myself out of the room. My dog was already going insane, and now you was yelling, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" It took me a couple of minutes to gain back my ability to speak. I had an inrush of thoughts. Did I actually just witness that, or am I tripping with no sleep? As I was rebooting, I started seeing images of the silhouette when I closed my eyes, like it was trying to gain entry into the villa through my mind. I know that sounds highly stupid and off the wall, but I had lingering effects like these for days after. I prepared to tell you and also ask you, what the hell is going on? She simply said, "What's going on is they're messing with us." I then replied quietly, "Not exactly. I think they want us to give them permission to come inside."